Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, all day Monday. Hello and welcome to Alastair Stewart and Friends. I am with you for the next 3 hours. Yes, we have an extra hour today. The time is just after 12 o'clock and we would love to hear from you from start to finish. We are GBNews. Today's the final day of national mourning ahead of tomorrow's state funeral for the late Queen. One of her final duties was to invite Liz Truss to form a government. That was on Tuesday, the 6th of September. 2 days later, the Queen was dead. Well, today, Liz Truss has a formal meeting with the new King at Buckingham Palace. And this evening, he hosts a reception there for world leaders here for that state funeral. It almost defines seamless. And yet yesterday evening, another truth was confirmed, movingly and majestically, as the late Queen's 8 grandchildren stood vigil to Granny, as they all called her. The new King's heir apparent, the Prince of Wales, his brother, the Earl of Sussex, the Duke of York's daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, the Princess Royal's son, Peter Phillips, and her daughter, Olympian Zara Tindall, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex's 2 children, Lady Louise Windsor, about to go to St Andrews University, and James, Viscount Severn, at 14 years of age, the youngest. It was a family affair. So, as her family, the nation and the world prepare for tomorrow's solemn and spectacular farewell, we will again look at Elizabeth the woman, the lover of animals, the patron of charities, the bestower of honours and royal warrants, and the mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother that she was. And I'm delighted to be joined by several who knew her, some who spent a lifetime reporting on her, and she has been honoured by many of my other guests as well, one who will be attending her funeral for that very reason. I also... We're also a news programme, so we'll be keeping you up to date with everything that happens, stuff that we know about and stuff that we don't know about, because like yesterday's walkabouts, it just suddenly happens. There's a lot that we do know about, however, so let's start by cutting live now to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who is at Buckingham Palace for today, where the King's expected to meet with his Prime Minister very shortly, and so much more today, Cameron.
Yeah, Alastair, in fact, in the last few seconds, the King has just driven from Clarence House to Buckingham Palace. I'm not sure if we can pick it up on the other camera. You can hear the crowd cheering right now, actually. He was accompanied by his principal private secretary. There we go. He's just going into Buckingham Palace right now. And then in the next 10 minutes or so, Alastair, he is expected to hold, as you were saying, that official audience with the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, in the 1844 room of Buckingham Palace. He's got a very busy diary today, but yesterday evening he actually had some telephone audiences with various world leaders, including the President of Ghana, the President of the United Arab Emirates, President of Egypt, and the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Now, the king has just entered the gates of Buckingham Palace. You can see it on your screen now. He's going through to the north entrance of the palace. Following his meeting with Liz Truss, he is expected to also hold an audience with other heads of states, other prime ministers, sorry, where he is also head of state of the realm. So the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea are all expected to meet His Majesty at 1 o'clock, again in the 1844 room of Buckingham Palace. And then we have this big diplomatic reception, Alastair, at 6 o'clock with various heads of state and other world leaders. It's the first time in a number of decades we've had quite so many heads of state on British soil. President Biden arrived in the UK last night. There's pictures on social media of his motorcade driving through the north of London. We know the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, are all expected to attend this evening. And Alastair, the Queen had this wonderful gift, this power of soft power of diplomacy, kind of an ability to boost British interests abroad without becoming too political. And no doubt this reception tonight is the King following in his mother's footsteps tonight. Other members of the royal family are also expected to attend, including the Queen Consort, Camilla, who is also expected to deliver a televised address this evening to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. She's expected to say, "I will always remember that smile. That smile is unforgettable." And Alastair, I think that smile very much is unforgettable and is going to be staying in a majority of our minds for a long time to come. And then at 8 o'clock this evening, the whole nation is going to be observing a minute's silence, remembering Her Majesty the Queen ahead of her funeral tomorrow.
There with the latest updates, as I say, on the news agenda, as well as the reflective and ceremonial agenda, and we'll be keeping him there and going back to him as the day unfolds. My first guest, I'm delighted to say, has been sitting with me here in the studio, royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Sorry. I want to make it clear before I begin our conversation, very much a correspondent at home and abroad, as much as abroad. But the first thing you said when you came in, while we were listening there, was that you've just come from Buckingham Palace as well. And you've done a few years' service, and you said you were overwhelmed by what you saw.
Indeed, because coming out of the press tents, there is a vast, just as you walk up towards Green Park, a tidal wave of humanity to pay tribute. It's quite extraordinary, people coming in their tens of thousands still. I mean, this is an example of the way the Queen embodied the soul of our nation, and people are showing affection, gratitude, waiting, as you know, for very long periods of time,
yes,
just for those very few precious seconds to pass that coffin in Westminster Hall. Very precious, and they'll remember it all their lives.
Have you ever seen anything in your lifetime of professional commentary and reporting on this sort of thing that gets anywhere near to it?
Nothing could be comparable, I don't think, because obviously the Queen Mother's funeral was, I mean, there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. Some 300,000 people paid homage in Westminster Hall. And also, as you will recall, The Guardian predicted that there would be precious little interest both in that and in the subsequent Golden Jubilee, and it had to recant, which is quite unusual. But, I mean, that was the one thing that comes to mind. Of course, the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, was something completely different. In a league of its own, you could say, the response. Churchill's funeral in 1965.
I always remember black and white, and I remember the cranes, the Dockers cranes, bowing in honour to Winston.
It's interesting.
It's an extraordinary image.
That one particular image has become legendary, has become part and parcel of the sort of tapestry of myth that surrounds these events.
While we're chatting, we're keeping up these pictures, which are just away from Buckingham Palace and across in the Palace of Westminster. the vigil, the lying in state of the late Queen, and again, dignitaries arriving to pay their respects, as well as, Richard just said, literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people queuing up outside to get in. And this again is the scene at Buckingham Palace. Again, we'll just watch those because that's two of the official Range Rovers, and therefore one of the royal party is going in there, or it could be Liz Truss going for the meeting that Cameron was talking about, because the Prime Minister uses a Range Rover occasionally herself, as well as whichever car is. There's an amusing minor debate about what car she's going to be using in future. But there we are. Cameron's going to find out who that was. I'm not going to speculate at any point because you don't want to waste your time with speculation. You want to have facts. And I'm going to bring Richard back into the conversation as we look at those folk there. Among the royal guests who are coming tomorrow are King Felipe of Spain, whose inauguration and marriage you commentated on, and Prince Albert of Monaco, whose wedding you commented on. Why do people like that feel it is so important to be here for her?
Because I think there are 28 royal families in the world today, and there's only one that has the profile, that has the cachet of ours. It's quite literally a fact. There will be a large contingent of royalty from around the world, and there's absolutely no question. I mean, from the Emperor of Japan is coming, apparently, and because of security considerations, they may all, and this is one of the aspects of it that's...
And only to butt in, because again, reading lots of stuff ahead of tomorrow, the fact that the Emperor of Japan and the Empress have almost been reclusive these last couple of 3 years. So not only to leave the palace and the peacock throne, but to come to the United Kingdom. That's a big deal.
It's a huge deal, and the world will be watching. It's been estimated that from 3 to 4 billion people around the world will be tuning in. I mean, that is so phenomenal. For Churchill's funeral, it was something like 320 to 50 million. It was a different age, and there 120 countries were represented. Here, there are reports that up to 200 countries, territories, parts of the world will be, and it will be an extraordinary event.
Yeah, let me just butt in on that to let you at home know, who are watching on television and listening on radio here on GB News, that Cameron's just told me in my ear that was indeed Liz Truss going for the meeting that he talked about at the very top of the programme. And of course, there's also the 6 o'clock diplomatic reception there at the palace. Richard, coming back down to the domestic agenda, you also commentated and covered the passing out as an officer from Sandhurst of Prince Harry.
Indeed, yes.
2 points. We are a news programme. We don't just do fawning and that sort of stuff. There is a story there that he only wore uniform at his vigil the night before last at the King's request, and yet his insignia excludes Elizabeth R. How significant is all of that to him, the man?
I think the need to wear military uniform, and you've seen 2 terms of duty as he has in Afghanistan, not to mention the Invictus Games, there's no doubt at all that whatever the protocol with reference to working royals, there's been a great deal of debate about this. What happened when he and William, wearing the uniforms of the Blues and Royals, appeared at that vigil with 6 other grandchildren, beginning a new tradition, I would suggest, for royal funerals. Yes. I think it was tremendously significant for him. I also think, indeed, by order of the King, as you say, but there is no doubt in the accession address, he sent love to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and
beginning their new life abroad.
Indeed, and that is the way I see it continuing. On the other hand, of course, as you know, the day afterwards, William's instigation and he and Catherine appeared with Harry and Meghan at Windsor, and of course looked at the floral tributes and met some onlookers and so on. But what will this in actual fact lead to? Now, that is what we don't know.
No, indeed.
We can hope.
And there was another curious indication, and we talked about it with friends of yours and colleagues on the programme yesterday, and that was live pictures. I suddenly got shouted at in my ear, as it's happened to you many times, and it happened to me yesterday. The King's going walkabout in South London, talking to members of the queue, and then the next thing was that, goodness gracious me, the Prince of Wales is with him as well. I mean, in effect, the King and his heir rewrote a big chunk of protocol yesterday, because it wasn't just walkabout nodding politely. It was in there, it was intimate.
It was indeed. You could see them shake hands, chat, the way they connected.
Just stop, look at that picture. Just look at that little face. Extraordinary. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I mean, that kind of sums up. It's every age, it's every generation.
And every generation, he'll think back in 10, 20, 30 years and remember this particular second. If you watch the people, I mean, the body language, of course, differs tremendously, but it's just the way the individual wishes to pass that catafalque with a magnificent Royal Standard drape.
There was a thing I was talking to my friend Tim Stanley, brilliant journalist who writes leader columns for The Telegraph, but lots of other great stuff, and has written really important books about the Constitution and the monarchy. And we were observing that they're, just so that you know what we're talking about, something slightly different, but that's just a reminder of what Richard and I were talking about. That is the walkabout yesterday that the King and the Prince of Wales did. But back to the Tim Stanley point, and you were saying, as we looked at the vigil there, the body language, you saw a woman do a straightforward curtsy. Everybody understands that. We've seen so many people make the sign of the cross, a very significant Christian gesture. The open hands held out, which is a Muslim, Islamic gesture, if you will, and also the hands held together. I mean, when the King talks about diversities of faith, it's there every hour in Westminster Hall.
Absolutely. His speech was very significant, and this, of course, harks back to the controversy with the Dimbleby interview when he admitted adultery, and this was, of course, in the very unhappy period with the Prince and Princess of Wales very much at loggerheads. And he said he wished to be defender of faith and not of the faith. Now, of course, in his accession broadcast, fortunately, has clarified that because the Church of England is certainly not strong, far from it. He will be Supreme Governor of the Church of England, defender of the faith. But what he was emphasising, and it takes me back to the Diamond Jubilee, it was the first engagement the Queen held at Lambeth Palace. And she clarified the issue, I thought, beautifully, by saying that the Church of England was an umbrella under which other faiths could flourish. And it was this that was his theme particularly.
Yes. Final point, and again, let's be grown up about it. You and I have been around in this game for a long time. There is a voice out there as well that is saying to the new King and his heir, steady as she goes, there are things that we've cherished and defended for a very, very long time. There is a line that you shouldn't cross, and there is a line to which you can go up and nod and smile and make change. How do you feel about that? Is the monarchy safe in their hands, plural?
I'd say that I think King Charles does recognise, on the one hand, and this was again came across in the accession speech, that you cannot be what could be called an activist monarch. I see that this, by the way, is being reinterpreted by some journalists that he could highlight issues but not campaign. Now, how that is handled depends an awful lot. It's to advise, to encourage and warn.
Yes.
It's his red boxes, it's the opening of Parliament, it's the weekly meetings with the Prime Minister, it's his Christmas broadcast, in his own words. That's as I see it. And of course the Queen, nobody knew what she thought. Nobody realised her view on Brexit or indeed on royal portraits.
Indeed.
One of the great strengths of a truly unique reign. So far, of course, as King Charles is concerned, people know what he thinks and a large number of issues. Things have changed now, and at the age of 70, he gave an interview and he said that he'd be foolish to diverge from the accepted line. But on the other hand, I do have, and I think a lot of people have, the suspicion that at heart he has got a certain amount of activism, which, fair enough, from climate change in 1969, this was taken on. So let's see, but it's a very, very fine line.
I'm going to ask you to stay, invite you to stretch your legs and have a coffee or whatever you want to do, but come back and continue the conversation a little later. But for the time being, Richard Fitzwilliam, thank you very much indeed for your wisdom and experience and sharing those thoughts with us. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GBNews TV and radio. And this weekend's news has seen rolling pictures of the queue to those wanting to see the Queen's lying in state, with many people waiting up to 16 hours to get to the front of that queue to pay their respects. There are smiling faces, there are forlorn faces, and there are tears shed by folk as they come out. Grief is a very complex emotion, and be it national or collective grief, it can impact upon us all and can conjure up other emotions and trigger unresolved issues of personal loss. So how can we process this grief, or help our loved ones affected by the loss? Staying with that theme, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks in the United States of America, the late Queen herself said grief is the price that we pay for love. As Prince of Wales, the King was patron of the Marie Curie charity, which provides care and support to people living with a terminal illness and those close to them. Jane Murray is a bereavement counsellor at the Marie Curie, and I'm delighted to say that she joins me down the line now. Jane, how do you sense that the King himself and indeed the rest of the immediate family are coping with their loss? Those young faces last night were sombre, but they were also sad.
Yeah, I think for her immediate family, grief is individual. It happens to us all when we lose someone very special to us, but for her family, they are caught up in the ritual and what is expected of them too. So their personal grief is very much buried within while they're on public display, and that may not come out until later, when the official mourning period is over. Particularly the younger people, and the young grandson there yesterday. I mean, at that age, to do something across the world in public view, that took a lot of courage, but I'm sure that it is something he really wanted to do. He didn't want to be left out. He would have been given the choice. And when it comes to children and young people, it really is about giving them a choice about joining in with particularly ceremonies like funerals.
As you were just finishing that answer, there we are now again, looking at the 8 grandchildren led by the Prince of Wales, and there in the back line, Zara Phillips, but 3 behind Harry is James Wessex, Viscount Severn, just 14 years old. I mean, in a sense, family is vital. If you're lucky enough to have a functioning nuclear family, blessed to have that, it really does matter. Be you my late granny or be you the Queen? Yes,
family. Hopefully, families come together at an emotional time like this, a time of grieving when someone so very special in any family has died. They can comfort one another, they can support one another, they can cry with each other. It's so important to be together. But as you said, many people don't have families nearby. They don't have families at all. And I think this is what plays into this huge public outcry. All these people queuing up to see the Queen and pay their respects because they may not have anybody close to them, or they may not feel able to talk to them. But something like this gives us permission to openly grieve and feel sad in public, and it's accepted at the time like this. For this whole week, it's accepted for us to be sad, to cry, to be emotional in front of the public. We don't have to use that British stiff upper lip and bury it within us. So it's quite cathartic for a lot of people and takes them back to a time when they have lost someone special to themselves who has died. That grief may well re-emerge now for a great many people. So it's all caught up with not only wanting to show respects and be part of history for the Queen, but also, remembering their loved ones who have died and, revisiting that grief. And there will be some people who, when they lost their loved ones, they may have unresolved grief, and that's only coming out now. So it is such a cathartic time, and as I said, gives permission to everyone of every age to be emotional.
Permission to do it. I was very taken this morning when the Archbishops of York and Canterbury jointly said, just remember there can be a danger in folk trying to grieve alone. It is very much a time to reach out to neighbours. They may be old or they may be young. All sorts of folk live alone these days. But people that you know in your community who do live alone, and maybe drop by or give them a call just to touch base with them and make sure they're okay.
Definitely, and we've not long come out of COVID, where it's very well documented the effect on people's mental health of the social isolation and the restrictions. In a way, we were grieving nationally for our normal way of life. So there's all that pent-up feeling and emotion too. And if you are alone or elderly and just don't feel able to reach out to people, at this time, it is about being compassionate to each other. And as you said, knock on the door, text people. We have our Marie Curie phone line that is open 7 days a week for people to pick up the phone. And there will be somebody on the end of the phone to care for them, and they can talk about their feelings. 0800 090 2309. It is about not being alone with what is inside you. Let it out in some way, preferably by talking to someone, but getting it out of your head by writing it down is another useful thing to do.
I'm glad you put that number up there, and I hope somebody will put that out as well on our website, just to remind people, because it is so important. One of the first interviews I did was with a gentleman who ran the Samaritans Trust as well. These helplines are absolutely vital, and folks should try and use them. The final question, and I always say this when it's a bit sensitive to people. You're not a politician or a professional commentator. You help run a brilliant charity. But I'm intrigued to know, given you're a former nurse and now a bereavement counsellor, do you think the royal family's collective grief at the loss of the late Queen might just help also heal the wounds and divisions that we know are within that family? We've talked about Harry and William, and we've talked about the King saying, no, you can wear uniform. The held-out hand of affection. These are times when sometimes we can all reflect and say, in honour of Mum, Granny, Great-Granny, let's bury the hatchet and try and move on together. What do you think?
I agree. It is a cathartic time in many different ways, not only about releasing feelings, but any family dynamics and issues that have gone on, they are now in the past. This is the time for a new beginning. For us all, it's a new way of learning to live a new way without the Queen. We will still have a monarch, but we won't have the Queen. So there is something about new beginnings and healing wounds, which isn't going to happen easily. But, the royal family have already began to reach out to each other. And, Harry wore his uniform. They jointly did their walkabout. So we can only hope that this will be the beginning of more to come.
Let's hope so too. Jane, a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for all of the good work that you and colleagues do at Marie Curie, and thanks for finding time for us this Sunday afternoon. Thank you. That's Jane Murray there, bereavement counsellor at the wonderful Marie Curie Trust. And just remember those points she made. If you're in deep trouble yourself and really worried, there are helplines, hers, Samaritans and others. And if you're just concerned that somebody down the road maybe lives on their Todd and may be suffering, give them a call, drop by, just touch base with them. It's humanity, nothing more grand than that. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. The time is just coming up to 12:30, and today is the fourth and final day of the Queen's coffin lying in state in Westminster Hall. We'll be bringing you all of the latest on that, the comings and goings. But first, let's bring you up to date with the all-important weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be rather cloudy, though mostly dry, with some scattered light showers continuing for some. Here are the details. It'll be a rather cloudy afternoon across Scotland, though there may be the odd sunny spell through this afternoon. Isolated showers will continue to affect northern and eastern coasts. Any showers will become confined to northern coasts of Northern Ireland, remaining rather cloudy this afternoon, though there will be some sunny spells. Scattered showers will continue to feed in off the North Sea across northern England. It'll be mostly cloudy this afternoon, though with some sunny spells as well. A dry afternoon for many in Wales, though there will be the odd shower mainly for northern coasts. The best chance of longer sunny spells will be in the far south this afternoon. Across the Midlands, it'll be a rather cloudy afternoon, though there will be the odd bright or sunny spell. Scattered showers will continue and become slightly more widespread, though they will be light. It'll remain mostly cloudy across East Anglia this afternoon. Scattered showers will also continue to feed in off the North Sea, though these will be mostly light in nature. Across southern England, it's going to be dry through this afternoon. It will be cloudier than yesterday, with the best of the sunny spells across the southwest. Showers will ease through the evening, though they will continue for northwest Scotland. Chilly in the south with clear spells developing. That's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day. Good afternoon, it's 12:30. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. King Charles is holding an audience with the Prime Minister. Liz Truss arrived at Buckingham Palace a short time ago, meeting the King ahead of a reception for visiting heads of state this evening. The US President Joe Biden, who arrived in the UK last night, will also be at the event. He's among 500 world leaders and dignitaries who will attend the Queen's state funeral tomorrow. Former Royal Close Protection Officer Simon Morgan told us security will be paramount.
This is massive. You know, as you've alluded to, it's the biggest policing operation UK police have ever undertaken. Metropolitan Police Service are used to dealing with big events. You know, we've got previous history for big events. However, this is off the scale.
A minute's silence will be held at 8 o'clock this evening to reflect on Queen Elizabeth's life ahead of the state funeral. With thousands still waiting to file past Her Majesty's coffin, the public is now being advised not to join the queue in order to avoid disappointment. Waiting times currently stand at least 13 hours, and Westminster Hall will close to the public at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Despite the wait, the mood from those in line is still positive.
It's been really, really lovely, and you know, it's one in a lifetime, so it's an experience, it's history, so I'm really proud to be part of it.
I nearly gave up halfway through, but my husband said, come on, we're doing it. And I think the further and further you go along, you think, oh, I've come this far, I may as well continue.
It is a magical moment for everybody, and it's a big achievement just for all of us for staying in this with the weather that we've had and how cold it's been. It's just nice to finally see the other end of it now, really, from where we started.
A 28-year-old man who allegedly approached the Queen's coffin at Westminster Hall on Friday has been charged with a public order offence. Mohammed Khan will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court tomorrow. He's the second person to be charged with committing an offence while in the queue to see the Queen's coffin. Well, thousands of people are expected to watch the funeral service on big screens across the United Kingdom. It'll be shown at public parks and venues in a number of cities. Around 125 cinemas and several cathedrals will also be screening the event. Meanwhile, an image of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II walking hand in hand with her husband Prince Philip has lit up the sky over Switzerland. The moving tribute was created by Swiss light artist Jerry Hofstetter in collaboration with the UK Embassy there. Around 1 million people are expected to visit the capital today, hoping to secure a prime spot ahead of the funeral. Public transport is expected to be under pressure, with Transport for London running 250 extra rail services and national highways suspending planned motorway closures across England. Mourners are being urged to delay their return journeys to avoid overwhelming the transport network on Monday afternoon. In other news, a man has been charged after 2 police officers were stabbed in central London. The attack happened in Leicester Square at around 6 o'clock on Friday morning. One officer was stabbed in his neck and chest, and the other was stabbed in her arm. 24-year-old Mohammed Rahman, who's been charged with attempted murder and grievous bodily harm, will appear at Wimbledon Magistrates Court tomorrow. The Ministry of Defence says Russia has increased strikes against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine over the past week. Officials say Moscow has ramped up attacks, even where it perceives no immediate military effect. Ukraine's electricity grid has also been targeted. The MOD says several thousand long-range missiles have been fired by Russian troops since the war began in February. The Prime Minister is reportedly considering plans to cut taxes for those who live in new so-called investment zones. According to The Sun, those in the proposed low-tax areas could see their personal contributions reduced, although no final decision has yet been made. Meanwhile, people who operate businesses within those areas could also see their levies slashed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Back to Alastair.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. And just picking up on 2 things from Ray's news bulletin. One is Liam Halligan and I will be here on Friday when that fiscal event takes place. So we haven't forgotten other matters that are taking place. So I hope you can book an appointment with us to try and understand what Liz Truss and her new Chancellor of the Exchequer are doing. The other thing is, delighted to say that Richard Fitzwilliams is back in the studio with me now, having had his brief pit stop as invited. And I'm thrilled to bits, as you can see there in the middle of your picture, my dear old friend Michael Cole, former BBC court correspondent, is back with me now. And forgive us at home, but I think you'll agree, we were all 3 of us sitting watching that lovely report in Ray's news bulletin of the queue and the mirth and the warmth, and we saw a tiara, a beanie and a Peaky Blinder hat. All her subjects and his subjects are there.
I've just come back from Canada Gate, as has our companion here. I've never seen scenes like it, and I've seen a lot. I've been a reporter for 60 years. Last February the 16th, I began in this rough trade of ours. Alastair, there has never been an international gathering like this since the Congress of Vienna after Waterloo and the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Only perhaps the peace conference at Versailles in 1919. Compared with what's going on here right now, heads of state, heads of government, the General Assembly of the United Nations is a mere nothing. And why is it? Because the people want to be here, whether they're the Emperor of Japan, the President of America, all the crowned heads. They want to pay tribute. And like those people down there, I just came here in a cab driver, and he told me very, very movingly about his young grandchildren went down, and by luck, good luck, they were on Albert Bridge when Lambeth Bridge on the Albert embankment, when Prince William was there yesterday. The scenes we're seeing here are momentous. We are living through historic days. Of course, people may think it's a little bit over the top, but actually it isn't. It's very important for a constitutional monarchy to mark the passing of a sovereign. In the last 200 years, there have been more solar eclipses than there have been funerals of sitting reigning monarchs. This is a very rare event, and people are recognising it. And they're, as we've said before, they're not being bussed down there or told to come. They're coming out of respect, if you like, or a bigger word, affection, or if you use the big word, love, of the monarch. And you can't buy that. That is earned over 70 years. And it's extraordinary, totally extraordinary.
There's also, we were talking just before Michael came in, Richard, about the diplomatic significance of it. And I love Michael Cole's historic analogy going right back to post-Waterloo events. And we talked about why people like Philippe of Spain and Albert of Monaco wanted to be here. Michael's point about the functioning of this constitutional monarchy is also vital, because there are those deemed by the late Queen, now King's government, who are judged not to be friendly nations, who will not be invited and will be consciously excluded from these events, even if they want to come.
Absolutely, and I think it's very significant for rather obvious reasons, because of the brutal war in Ukraine, Russia and its satellite Belarus, also Myanmar, where the regime has been atrocious. We also apparently have no diplomatic relations with Syria and Venezuela, so they won't be invited, and some states, such as North Korea, will be asked just to send ambassadors. So, as you say, there is a list, quite a short one, though, of pariah states, and I think there should be.
Yeah, I'm going to come back and carry on that. Bear that thought in mind, file it away with all of the other millions of thoughts I know you have. Both of you so incredibly well informed, but also brilliantly prepared for adding to our conversation. But we're going to cross live across now to our Northern Ireland reporter, Duchy, who is at Hillsborough Castle for us today. We've chatted several times about how deeply respected the late Queen was in Northern Ireland and south of the border. Can you tell us a little more from your own perspective and experience about that relationship and reputation that the late Queen had?
Well, indeed. In fact, I'm just down the road from Hillsborough Castle. I'm in the city of Lisburn. And she did. She had massive kudos here, if we can use that describing a monarch. She was well respected, not only in Northern Ireland, but in Southern Ireland. And you've got to remember parties like Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are the ruling parties down there, but they're under real pressure at this minute in time from Sinn Féin. And Sinn Féin were the political wing of the IRA. They, of course, are the biggest political party now in the Republic of Ireland, although they don't have enough Taoiseach Doilers to form a government there. There is a coalition between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that is holding a government together. It must be said that it's not that steady, but they are looking for another election there. And the Queen, the heads of state there, including President D. Higgins, have picked up on when the monarchy visited there. And that all goes back not to Mary McAleese, but that actually went back to Mary Robison, who met the Queen in the Somme, where you've got to remember in the First World War, there was an awful lot of Republic of Ireland, because it wasn't a republic at that stage, that fought in the First World War. And Parnell and so forth was very respectful to the monarchy at that stage of the game. Well, of course, then came the split between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and Unionists very much aligned themselves to the monarch. So the respect that she had in the north, in Northern Ireland, was immense. Well, we've now seen that Prince Charles has put his hand out, and this is where we really see the monarchy's power. He has put his hand out to Sinn Féin, invited Michelle O'Neill, the leader of Sinn Féin in the north, where they are also the largest party, but no government because of the protocol, and he's invited them to London to the Queen's funeral, and they have accepted, which is very, very, it's fascinating actually, because what you're now seeing is a stamp of approval, a hand to Sinn Féin saying, come up onto the world stage, this is the power the monarchy has. And Sinn Féin are accepting that the monarchy has that power, and they are trying to get themselves ready for government in the Republic of Ireland. And as much as a lot of Unionists here may be upset by this, it's probably going to rattle more cages in the Republic of Ireland, where they are now being given political credibility. And that is very, very hard to get, but it's also very, very easy to lose.
Interesting, Duchy, as well. I noticed in that context, and brilliant analysis, absolutely, which I'm going to ask my studio guest to comment on in just a moment. But also I noticed, again, doing homework for tomorrow, that the Republic of Ireland, era if you will, not only gets an invitation for its Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, to attend, but also the President of Ireland. There aren't many countries out there that get both. They either get a President or a King, or they get a Prime Minister. Ireland gets both.
Well, they do, because there is this, no matter what anybody thinks of it, the British Isles, there is a very, very strong relationship between Britain and Ireland. There are, I mean, more people, Irish people, live in Britain than there is in Connaught. There's about £65 billion worth of trade between the Republic of Ireland and Britain every single year. And their food flows freely between north and south. We have the common travel area. We have very much a relationship with the South. I mean, I have some relations in the South. Loads of people here have relations north and south, and east and west, it must be said. And that has been building steadily back to where we were. The rewriting of the narrative of history has stopped dead in its tracks when this monarch has died, and we have had to go back and look and see exactly who was, where, and what they were doing and when.
Duchy Beattie, brilliant, as always. Keep in touch with us. You're there live for the rest of the day. And thank you very much indeed. Duchy Beattie, our Ireland correspondent there. And you were just seeing a changing of the guard, one of those lovely visual metaphors. He was talking about a changing of the guard and goodness knows what else in Ireland there. And listening intently to that were Michael Cole and Richard Fitzwilliams, my two studio guests. And we were both, all three of us, looking at that thinking, wow, this guy's good. He's absolutely on the money. He used that analogy of extending the hand of friendship to Sinn Féin, clearly in the ascendant, democratically, in both north and south of Ireland. Talking of hands being extended, the late Queen did not have to extend her hand to Martin McGuinness, did not have to attend that meeting. She did, and it was potency. Michael.
Alastair, I saw the Queen around the world. I never admired her more than 2011 and the state visit to Ireland, because the important thing is nobody else could have done it. It wouldn't have mattered if it had been a politician at all, because she was the granddaughter of King George V, who signed the instrument which created the Irish Free State, which became ERA, which became the Irish Republic in 1949. And she went to Croke Park, scene of the original and terrible Bloody Sunday. She went to the Martyrs' Memorial in the park. She bowed her head. She spoke some words in Erse. She and Mary Robinson, became almost pals. And that is the exercise of soft power. And of course, meeting Martin McGuinness, and he was moved by it. He was definitely moved by it. And if it's the Queen's function or the monarch's function, if the regime, the government in Northern Ireland is led by Sinn Féin, well then that is the decision by the democratic people of Northern Ireland.
The other extraordinary thing is that there seems to have been a passing on of the mantle as well, because it's perfectly clear from those pictures that we saw a couple of days ago in Northern Ireland and the collective meeting that the new king had with people. There's not just a nodding relationship with the President of Ireland and his wife between and with the new king. They know each other well, they like each other well, and they share a passion for poetry, for example.
Yes, indeed. Michael D. Higgins is a remarkable figure. He is a poet. And one of the significant aspects of this, I think, and in St Anne's Cathedral, he was in the congregation, was following the Queen's amazing visit, setting the seal on the peace process in 2011. It was President Higgins who in 2014 was here on a state visit, and Martin McGuinness was in white tie, as I recall, at Windsor Castle.
Indeed. You pause perfectly. I just want folk at home to dwell upon that picture there. We've lost it as we look at some more of the world leaders who've come along to say hello. But that was just a lovely image of looked like a gunner from his head back in a wheelchair being pushed by a young para.
You know, this has all been planned 30 years. Operation London Bridge has fallen down. But it's one thing having a plan. It's another thing putting it into action absolutely perfectly. And you know, that Irish visit, it cannot be overemphasised the importance of it, because the Queen went into the citadel of republicanism, Cork. You know, there's nothing more Republican than Cork. And she went to the market in her green coat. She was perfect.
We have to leave it there. We'll return to that and much more later on, because my next guest is on a link, and I do not want to miss it, because one question that I was asked by a whole lot of you when the late Queen died was, what happens to the dogs? I didn't know, so I asked an insider friend of mine who told me, and I quote, "She'll have thought about that, like everything else," close quote. Well, we know that she indeed spoke to the head of her equestrian interest shortly before she died, and we now understand that the dogs will indeed be looked after by the Duke of York and his family. She really was a real animal lover. So I'm delighted to be joined by Ciara Farrell, who is the Library and Collections Manager at the Kennel Club, of which the late Queen was, of course, patron. Wow, I hope I got that introduction right, because as I mean, from childhood, she didn't just have dogs as a pet. She loved dogs, and especially corgis.
Yes, she was absolutely passionate about her corgis, and she's had corgis since the age of 7. Herself and her sister Margaret were given a corgi by their father, who was then the Duke of York, and that corgi was called Duchy because he was owned by the Duke of York. He was the first of many corgis in their lives. They had 4 corgis when they were little girls, and at the age of 18, the Queen got Susan, who you see there. Susan was the most special dog. She was her first dog that she owned as an adult. She was with her when she courted Prince Philip. She was with her when she got married. She went on honeymoon. With the young couple, she was also there at the birth of her children and at the sad death of her father and her own ascendance to the throne.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I'm listening to John Warren, the racing manager of Her Majesty, who was saying, yeah, she liked horses, she loved racing, but she also had a really detailed technical knowledge of bloodlines and so on and so forth. That Windsor line that you've just described, that started with Susan, I think it was, who was the breeding one that went on, it became quite a thing. I mean, it wasn't, again, you know, we have dogs, we love them, but when the late Queen does it, it becomes serious. The Windsor line of corgis became a thing. Did the Kennel Club recognise it?
They did, of course. They were all registered with us here at the Kennel Club. She had about 30 in total from Susan's line. They were all registered, and she took her breeding very, very seriously. With her great friend Nancy Fenwick, who helped her with her dogs, she identified the type of dogs she wanted to breed her dogs to, and it was arranged very discreetly, as you would imagine, but it was something that she had great knowledge of and took great care with.
Incredibly moving as the late Queen got older and perhaps conscious of her personal frailty, that she eased off, she backed down. It wasn't a constant generational replacement, and she embraced the dorgie, a cross between Dachshunds and corgis, which I don't know whether you Kennel Club people recognise them or not, but anyway, it just seemed to me that scaling back and shifting were the actions of a real animal lover.
Yes, she ceased to breed corgis quite some time ago, and the last of Susan's descendants was called Willow, and Willow died in 2018.
I think we're looking at a picture now. Oh, yes, no, Michael Cole's pointed it out as well. That is a dorgie there, sitting quietly and behaving itself with the late Queen smiling from ear to ear. One hears from many insiders that she was also occasionally amused when a corgi, or perhaps even a dorgie for all I know, snapped at the heels or ankles of visiting political dignitaries. Now, going back to the Windsor line and the corgi, with no disrespect to dorgies, but I want to focus on this, what impact did the late Queen's interest in not just dogs, but that particular breed of dog, have on the popularity of the breed? Did it really, I mean, did people say, I want to have the same dog as Her Majesty has?
It did in the 1950s and 60s for sure. The corgi is a Welsh farming dog. It wasn't that well known until the royal family took it on as a pet dog, and numbers rocketed in the 50s and 60s. They died off considerably. Those numbers really, really slowed down in the 21st century, although they have had a recent revival, possibly due to being featured in shows such as The Crown and other media. For example, the wonderful skit that took place at the 2012 Olympics. So they've gone from being very popular to being in very low numbers to being in a nice, steady recovery phase just at the moment.
Ciara, great pleasure talking to you, and thanks for all of the important and good work that you do. We're going straight now to Cameron Walker, as you can see live at Buckingham Palace. A statement, I gather, from the Duke of York.
Yes, that's right, Alastair. In the last 5 minutes or so, the Duke of York, Prince Andrew, has released a statement paying tribute to his mother, the Queen. He says, "Dear Mummy, Mother, Your Majesty, 3 in 1. Your Majesty, it has been an honour and a privilege to serve you. Mother of the nation, your devotion and personal service to our nation is unique and singular. Your people show their love and respect in so many different ways, and I know you are looking on, honouring their respect. Mummy, your love for a son, your compassion, your care, your confidence I will treasure forever. I have found your knowledge and wisdom infinite, with no boundary or containment. I will miss your insights, advice and humour. As our book of experiences closes, another opens, and I will forever hold you close to my heart with my deepest love and gratitude, and I will tread gladly into the next with you as my guide. God save the King." The Duke of York, their statement paying tributes to his mother, the Queen. He has also released a photograph of the two of them when Prince Andrew was a baby, him and his mother, the Queen. We know that when his mother was spending a lot of her time at Windsor Castle over the last few years, Prince Andrew, who lived very close by, used to go and visit his mother. They shared a close bond, we believe, until the end, even though Prince Andrew had stepped back as a working member of the royal family.
The words that come to my mind, Cameron, are through thick and thin.
Yes, that's right. So I think they have had some good times and bad times, particularly with the fallout from various scandals to do with the Duke of York over the last couple of years, which inevitably forced him to step back as working member of the royal family. But, you know, the Duke of York served in the Falklands. He has done many years of military service, and I think it was interesting, Alastair, that he distinguished between mother, his own personal mother, mother of the nation, and as head of state. And those were the key 3 roles, I think, Her Majesty had. She was very much a mother, but she is also head of state, like I said. And I think the procession we saw on Wednesday was that handover from the family, from their private vigils inside Buckingham Palace and within Balmoral Castle. And then we had this ceremonial procession to Westminster Hall for Her Majesty the Queen to then lie in state, so her people, her subjects, could pay their own personal tributes to her.
And thank you very much indeed for that breaking news statement from Andrew, Duke of York, and for your analysis. Listening very intently to it, my 2 studio guests, Michael Cole and Richard Fitzsimmons. I mean, I said through thick and thin, but as Cameron was talking, 2 images came back to me from my time as a reporter alongside Michael Cole. Was after the Falklands War and when Ark Royal returned to Portsmouth, this bright young face in military uniform with a red rose in his mouth, beaming from ear to ear, cameraman brilliantly cut to Her Majesty the Queen, beaming from ear to ear. And the other is the Windsor Castle fire, where the Queen was in a raincoat and a headscarf. And Andrew was there alongside, helping people get paintings out and precious valuables. You know, roll your sleeves up, do the job done. God, he was a complex mixture.
Alastair, he's the black sheep of the family.
And she adored him.
But the word is family.
Yeah.
The bloodlines, the blood connection. And as you say, he served his country well.
No.
He put himself in danger. He could have come back in a coffin. Let's be honest,
This box
or a
is
body
doing my
bag.
head in. Can we not go
And
back
the Queen
to the
was
old one?
delighted by that. And you know, the great thing about it, with your former colleague, Anthony Carthew, we did the first interview with the Prince Andrew and with Sarah Ferguson on the morning their engagement was announced. And that was hailed by newspapers as the most candid, most revealing they'd ever been. And they were fun, they were nice, they were good. Prince Andrew, I've known him over the years, I've met him over the years. He's not a bad man, he just made some very bad decisions, and he's paying his penance for that. And that will take, in my view, probably 10 years. If he wants reinstatement, if he wants to re-entry into a public life again, he will have to do what other people do, serve their time and regret and repent.
Is that, I mean, you wear both hats. You're an international correspondent. Michael and I are very much UK-focused, although we have a deep fascination in global matters as well. I think Mr. Cole is being slightly optimistic. I think a lot of the world will never forget because of one word, and that's Epstein.
I think he's being more than slightly optimistic. I think he's being very optimistic. An image that went through my mind, because, as you say, he and the Queen had this very special rapport. After all, when he was born, she was able to spend more time with him. I was at the memorial service for Prince Philip, and the way he was supporting her, in the sense that in very difficult times she had undoubtedly supported him. But having said that, I mean, opinion polls are fripperies, yes, but if you look at, even in Britain, less than 10% are favourable towards him. Now, from that level, you can't get much lower. Internationally, I suspect it's similar or even worse. And there, of course, are a variety of reasons for this. The link with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And
yes.
The fallout from this.
But it's also, and I butted you in, you come in, but let me add something else for you to reflect upon as well. And as Richard was speaking, then another thing crossed my mind, and that is the affection and love that we're seeing there now, as these people still come to attend the vigil, the lying in state there of the late Queen, is that they can be fickle. You can take Harry as well, to add him to the argument. Invictus Games, 2, as you said, Michael, earlier, active tours of duty, not a ceremonial wearer of uniform, a man who flew helicopters and fired guns. You put one foot wrong in the public eyes and you serve penance at best. You're out at worst. Ditto. I mean, I can remember, as I'm sure you did as well, when the Duke of York was a trade ambassador. I mean, deemed by industry as doing a damn fine job on behalf of the UK.
But foolish.
Michael.
No, I was going to say, it's the greatest shame that it happened. Of course, he never admitted to anything. He was never convicted of anything. It's important to say that.
Yes.
One may say, well, why on earth did he pay £12 million or $12 million in damages? It was all foolishness. But, you know, there's something about the British public. They are endlessly forgiving, and people who've been in the public eye, who've had a problem, have found that that's true. Rehabilitation is possible. It may take a long time. It depends on what he does. I would suggest, if I was giving him PR advice, which I'm not, that he spends a long time doing something very worthwhile, doesn't talk about it, let somebody else say what he has done, and then see how it comes about. Because he can't be cast into outer darkness forever. He's there, he's a reality. He's got 2 princesses who are seem to be more part of the royal family than hitherto. So it's a greatest shame for him. I mean, it's interesting in his statement, 3 in 1, it's very bit ecclesiastical, that. I think it was slightly overwritten, if I may say so, but obviously greatly sincere. And such a shame. I mean, as you say, the picture with the red rose through his very ample teeth, and when he was passing out at Dartmouth, the Duke of Edinburgh was presiding that day, huge smile on both their faces. You know, you can't cast aside that, because the Falklands War, albeit 40 years ago, could have been a defining moment for him. The Queen could have been welcoming him back dead.
Indeed. The time is coming up to 2 minutes past 1, and you're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GBNews TV and radio, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. I'm here with you on GB News and TV radio until 3 o'clock today, bringing you the very latest on the 14th and final day of the Queen's coffin lying in state. But first, no, we're not going to go to the weather forecast now. That's what it says there. We're going to take a sting, as they call it in the trade. Just a pause for you. Hello and welcome to Alastair Stewart and Friends. I'm with you for the next 2 hours now. We'd really love to hear from you. You've already been sending in your messages. We are GB News, and I'm just going to read one quick one out because I've seen so much of this on social media as well. Craig says, what about a national monument of reflection for all the homeless people who've been ignored while the firefighters hand out blankets to those waiting in line to nod at a box? I don't want to be accused by anybody of not having this story in balance. We've had detailed conversations here about the fact that, on average, more than 60% of people support the monarchy, and that means, by definition, that others don't. But we've also had tweets like this one that say, let's have another monument to the late Queen, preferably riding a horse, and let's have it perhaps on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square. Well, thank you for that, and that's from Cole. My own view is that it should be in that beautiful park at Windsor where the Royal Windsor Horse Show takes place, which she loved with a passion and never missed. And as I've said many times on this programme, the late Queen's passion for horses is very well known. That she was deeply knowledgeable and a total professional about the sport and everything to do with it has been celebrated in recent days as well, and rightly so. To have a royal warrant from her as a supplier is pretty amazing. And when it's for saddlery, among the most important bits of riding kit, it is truly awesome. Adrian Benge, the owner of Buttons Saddlery, is just such a man. Royal saddle maker by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen. And gets a nod for that. Pride from start to finish. You're now semi-retired, Adrian, but I think your face just says it all, but I'm going to ask you to say it in words as well. What was it like being a supplier to one of the best informed and most competitive owners and riders of horses in the world?
I have to say, Alastair, it was absolutely marvellous to do. You couldn't actually say anything that the Queen didn't know about saddles or horses. So you had to sort of be honest with her every time. And she was really lovely and I mean, a pleasure to work for. It really was an honour, in my opinion.
A picture for those watching on television. I'll just explain it for those listening on radio, because we have those lovely people as well. There is your royal warrant above Buttons the saddle makers, and what a magnificent and beautiful thing it is. No little sticker on a label or something. That's a great crest. You and I know a little bit about horses. You a lot more than me, but I have a passion for it as well. I've often said on this programme that it's worth remembering that, you know, with John Warren, she knew everything there was to know about flat racing and bloodlines and the rest of it. But she was a damn fine rider herself, and she was a woman, even of a certain age, who could not only ride at a good canter and gallop across Windsor Great Park in her day, she could do side saddle, she could do very slow walk at things like the State Opening of Parliament on Burmese. You know, she was good in the saddle, forgive the pun.
I have to say she was very, very knowledgeable about saddles. And in fact, I think it was about 6-7 years ago, I made a saddle that the warrant holders presented to her for her 86th birthday. We made a saddle to her specifications, basically, because she used to like a nice deep seat. And over the years, getting older, she decided she wanted a slightly flatter seat where the cantle wasn't quite so high and she could dismount easier. So we made a saddle that accommodated that.
Trudeau.
Adrian, just bear with me for 30 seconds. Do not go anywhere. It's a live programme, and we're just seeing the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, go into number 10. That's the official bit of what's going on today. So an important ally, part of the listening group, part of the collective intelligence service around the world, a big ally, a big Commonwealth country, but also because we are where we are in history, a man whose father was also Prime Minister of Canada, and when he was doing business with Prime Ministers in this country, and indeed the late Queen herself, little toddler Trudeau would have seen it all and been running around and bumping into angles. So there we are, Trudeau and entourage. Going into number 10 for business, and he'll be out of that later on after he's had his meetings with Liz Truss. And then to remind you that at 6 o'clock tonight, he and many other heads of state will be there at Buckingham Palace for the full diplomatic reception hosted by His Majesty the King. Adrian, thank you for your patience there. Sorry to butt it in. There we are. Just before we cut away, you were saying about having made a saddle for her in recent years and it being presented. I also heard on the grapevine, and I suspect you know exactly who I'm talking about, that she had almost an intimate relationship with you guys, not only saddle maker but also farriers, the people who got mud under their nails and got their sleeves rolled up to do work. You used to have little tea parties occasionally, didn't you?
Yes, we did. Yes, we used to get invited over for afternoon tea or, in fact, a dinner. Some Christmases used to organise a private dinner for us all, and it was lovely. Yeah, it really was lovely. Yeah.
This is a cheeky question, but I genuinely want to ask you it, so I will. I'm guessing as well that although she knew everything about everyone, world affairs, leaders like we've just seen Mr. Trudeau going in there and what have you, when you had those tea parties or even those dinners, was the conversation broad-ranging or was it just horses? I mean, don't breach any protocols and tell me state secrets, but just to give my viewers and listeners a colour, a flavour of what it was like to sit down and take tea or have dinner with Her Majesty the Queen as an equestrian.
I have to say, she did talk about horses, but she talked about loads of other things, current topics in the, what was going on in the world or in the UK, and it was marvellous just to talk to her. And the only thing you had to remember was that she was Her Majesty the Queen, and it was just like really sitting down with a little old lady in any stable yard and talking to them. But you had to remember who you were with, and you were with Her Majesty the Queen. So, it was really an honour to do.
Such lovely memories to cherish, Adrian, and thank you so much for delicately, discreetly and with love and warmth sharing them with us here on GB News. Great to talk to you again, and our mutual friends send love to you as well, and good luck with what you do in your retirement.
Thank you very much, Alastair. Lovely to talk to you again.
Adrian Benge there, the owner of Button's Saddlery. Extraordinary royal saddle makers to the late Queen, and a man who was lucky enough to take tea and occasionally have a supper party. Let's cross live now to our royal reporter Cameron Walker, who's at Buckingham Palace for us today. So you tipped us off about comings and goings there. We saw various people arrive and depart, and we've just seen Trudeau arrive at Downing Street for chats. They'll all be back there later on this evening, 6 o'clock, for that diplomatic reception. What is behind you, I said this to you yesterday, but I'll repeat it because I thought it was not a bad line, is a royal palace and residence. It's also an office. Work goes on.
Yes, it's very much a working palace, Alastair, and in fact His Majesty the King is using Clarence House still as his personal home, as it were, and coming here to Buckingham Palace to do his official business. Last time I spoke to you, we saw the King arrive at Buckingham Palace for his various meetings this afternoon, followed very shortly after by Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, who I believe is now back in Downing Street because, as we just saw on our televisions, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, has arrived in Downing Street for talks with her. Right now, the King is having an audience with a number of Commonwealth Prime Ministers, including the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea. As for Her Majesty the Queen and lying in state, this is the final day for members of the public to pay their own personal respects to Her Majesty the Queen. The last time I checked, the queue time was 14 hours, and they'd actually shut the queue because Southwark Park, which is the end of the queue, was at capacity. So if we have any more details on that, we'll bring that straight to you. The King has had a busy diary, actually, over the last couple of days. Last night, in addition to the audiences he's doing today. He had telephone calls with the King of the Ashanti Kingdom, the President of Ghana, the President of the United Arab Emirates, President of Egypt, and the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Now, the reason I'm reading out all of these countries to you, Alastair, is because of this big diplomatic reception we're expecting to happen at 6 o'clock today. Her Majesty the Queen was very good at what perhaps could be best described as soft diplomacy, kind of promoting British interests abroad. And no doubt His Majesty the King and the rest of the royal family, and indeed the government, are very aware of the power the monarchy has with bringing different countries together. So that's exactly what we're going to be seeing tonight here at Buckingham Palace. We know that President Biden of the United States of America is already on UK soil. He arrived last night. We just saw Justin Trudeau, and there's various other world leaders going to be there tonight, as well as other members of the royal family, including Her Majesty the Queen Consort. No details as to the other members of the royal family. When we have that, we'll bring that straight to you. Then, of course, tonight we've got at 8 o'clock a minute's silence to pay tribute and remember Her Majesty the Queen, who reigned over us for over 70 years.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. The rules of engagement are working perfectly well. You give us a shout when you've got something to share with us to keep us right up to date. I'm probably breaching a confidence between how these things work, but I know that the viewers and listeners like to be involved in it. So he finds out stuff that's happening, he gives us a shout, we go to him, and then we come back to carry on our conversation. And he will continue to do that throughout the day. So honestly, hand upon heart, you won't miss a thing. And his explanations they're excellent. It's 1:15, and Richard Fitzwilliams, royal commentator, and Michael Cole, former BBC court correspondent, and both great writers about these matters, are still with me. And joining us down the line, I'm delighted to say, is another good friend of mine, Dr. Philip Kisley, who is joining us from the University of Leeds, who writes lectures and teaches about, how can I put it, social norms, the development, cultural historian. That's the kind of stuff he does, and mainly because he's a failed pop musician, and my heart goes out to him because we're mutual huge fans of the Rolling Stones, but none of us were born to be Rolling Stones. Me, a mere reporter, and Philip, a great academic. Great to see you, and thanks for joining us, Philip. You are in marvellous company as well with Michael Cole and Richard Fitzwilliam. I'm going to start off, and I'm going to start with you, actually, because Richard and Michael have touched upon this already, which you may or may not have heard. But here's the point. There is an intimacy to the relationship that the new king is seeking to establish with his subjects through those walkabouts yesterday, permitting a kiss, tapping an arm, and the rest of it. But here's the question. The late Queen said, "I need to be seen to be believed," but Bagehot, the great constitutional commentator, said, "We must not let in daylight upon the magic." The balance is very delicate, Philip.
Yeah, I think it is, but I think the balance absolutely depends on context. And I think what Charles is doing at the moment, what King Charles is doing at the moment, is absolutely appropriate. It seems to me that it feels almost like it's Christmas in the trenches here. It feels as though everything's suspended and the usual norms don't apply. I'm thinking particularly about the culture wars, and I'm thinking about institutions and generally what institutions think about Britishness and the monarchy and the national identity and all of those things. So I think it's absolutely appropriate that Charles should, at this moment, show, the human side. He is a man who's suffering, who's grieving and mourning like the rest of the country. So that togetherness, I think, is really important, because believe me, come Tuesday, it's going to be back to normal and the culture wars are going to resume.
Well, I love it. That's such a cheeky analogy of being in the trenches in the First World War. I'm going to bring Michael and Richard in a moment, but let me float back to another analogy. Might it not just be football, between the lines, a pause for thought and reflection, after which they either get back into their trenches and carry on killing each other, or, lo and behold, do you know what? It might just be better days ahead.
I think there are a few things here, and I think there's the domestic front, and I think there's the international front. So I'm thinking about the Commonwealth here, and I don't know whether you've covered this already. But we are in this moment of reflection, and it's actually, well, I don't think it's a moment of reflection. I think it's a process of grief and mourning, and I think they're slightly different things. I think the reflection will come. It might well be that things are better, and things will be better if we can articulate this confidence and this clarity of what it means to be British, and the goodness and the I've just noted down a few words here as I was just thinking last night about what was going on, and I think one of the key thing for me is confidence, but there's also dignity, community, coherence, kindness, good humour, acceptance, stamina, and stoicism. And I think if we can articulate those things in the weeks and months and years to come, this is what it means to be British, as opposed to being forced into boxes of race, gender, and sexuality, a coherent version of what it means to be British, then we will be in a good position.
Richard first and then Michael. Intriguing academic analysis of much of what we've been talking about, but really focused with that selection of words and ambitions for the United Kingdom of the future under the reign of Charles III.
And extremely hopeful on the whole, yeah. I would say. It's very difficult to get the right balance on this because, after all, there's post-Brexit problems, there's the cost of living crisis, we've had the pandemic, a lot of very, very depressing things. Now, the Queen was able, absolutely uniquely, to reach out. That virtual broadcast at the beginning of the pandemic was sheer magic. Will, I wonder, King Charles be able to do something likewise? Could he inspire in the way his mother did? I mean, of course, every monarch has their own style. But looking forward, I find it very difficult because it does depend, firstly, on Scotland. And if, for example, Northern Ireland, but also because with the Catholic-Protestant ratio now is very, very 50-50. If the country were to split during the King Charles's reign, I would find it deeply depressing, and I think also it would be very, very difficult for the monarch. Of course, he might be the head of an independent Scotland, because in 2014, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon did intend, well, it was Alex Salmond did intend to keep the monarch, but it would be very disorientating, and economically, again, there are huge question marks, the energy problem and so forth. Yeah. So I mean, it's not that I feel in any way depressed. I think that it's tremendously challenging. It would be fascinating also to see whether Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, and her policies do have the lift, the economic lift required.
The coincidence of a change of Prime Minister and a change of monarch is extraordinary. Michael, you chronicled getting on for half of the evolution of the Elizabethan era, and in parallel to that, the evolution of what Charles became as sort of slightly uncomfortable and insecure undergraduate in a dustbin, to the inauguration as Prince of Wales in that extraordinary Lord Snowdon event, to becoming the thinking, passionate man that he is now. Is it to a plan or is it evolution?
We're seeing it already, Alastair. You've picked up on the evolution. Walter Bagehot, who you quoted, was a great 19th century journalist and constitutional expert, and his, don't let daylight in on magic, was right for the times of Queen Victoria. But King Charles has already shown, with his very heartfelt televised address when he extended the hand of love to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and in allowing the Accession Council, where he spoke extremely movingly and well, to have television in for that. He wants a more open society. He wants a more open monarchy, a slimmed-down monarchy, and he's more in tune to the times. And I think that is only to be applauded. I think that you mentioned the dustbin, singing in the dustbin. I actually covered that story. I'm that old. When he was at Trinity College, Cambridge. He took, to my mind, I'm 5 years older than Prince Charles, so I've seen him throughout my life. I remember at primary school buying national savings stamps with his picture on. His was half a crown. The one with his baby sister on was only sixpence. So I've watched him throughout this period. And you mentioned yesterday on the Albert Embankment and Lambeth Bridge, I mean, a walkabout is not his forte, but he was doing it. He was doing it well. The crowds were singing God Save the Queen. But Prince William, he is Diana's son. I mean, it's a natural for him. And you heard a very rarely heard anthem, God Bless the Prince of Wales. And it was great to see it. I remember when Prince Charles and Princess Diana, as they then were in Tokyo, and we went to Mitsukoshi, which is like the most important department store, and they had a lovely choir of about 40 little girls singing God Bless the Prince of Wales. It was very moving. It really was. And I think King Charles is going to grow into this job. A short reign, because it's obviously going to be short compared with his mother's 70 years, can be a very successful one.
Yeah. Let me bring Philip back in on exactly that point. And Philip, Michael ends there saying the man is in his 70s, and we're not casting any dispersions upon his health or well-being or anything, wish him well. But by definition, it cannot be a reign anywhere near as long as the late Queen. But the other point Michael and Richard were both commenting upon so perceptively after your little list and your agenda for evolution is that point about the degree to which someone like King Charles III can have a battle plan. This is what I want to do. This is my strategy, as opposed to pragmatic tactics, responding to events, dear boy, as Macmillan probably never said, but is always quoted as having said. Is it a strategy? Is it tactical? Is it pragmatic? Is there a plan?
That's a really good question, and it's the question in lots of ways, isn't it? Because if we just, I mean, my points there about confidence were that the big word was if there, and that was really about not being on the back foot, not responding to the attack on Britain, not responding to the attack on culture, but actually moving forward with a vision of what culture is. It's almost kind of building on the work of the late Sir Roger Scruton and the work people like Douglas Murray do now. It's, you know, what does it mean to be British, and how can we have a coherent vision of that? And that is a kind of methodology as opposed to methods, if you like.
Philip,
okay, it is a strategy. Yes.
Have you read Matthew Syed in the Sunday Times today?
I haven't had a chance to. No.
OK, when we've done, how dare I tell a lecturer what to do, but go and have a look at it. It's utterly brilliant. The headline is, and I quote, "You can scoff at ritual, but as a nation, we cannot survive on rationality alone." We love a bit of cosy, a bit of music, a bit of solemnity. We're looking at Prince of Wales there yesterday. Well, now it's gone, but it was there a moment ago, doing that walkabout. But if you cut to that, and we can try and do it in televisual terms, if you like, to the solemnity of the lying in state and the vigil, the Brits like both. They like it in balance, but they like both.
They do, because it's about identity, isn't it? It's about heritage, and it's about who we are. It's the grand narrative of who we are, and we live in a world of deconstructed grand narratives. We live in a world of postmodernism. We live in a world where, you know, we stay in our lane, and this is about reaching out, and this is about knowing who we are. I just wanted to make one other point, Alastair, if I can, and it's that broader point about the Commonwealth, and this is where I'm not as confident, because the Queen was the linchpin in terms of holding things together and talking about identity. The Queen was very much the linchpin of holding together the Commonwealth. Charles will have a real job. King Charles will have a real job of doing that. Not tomorrow, not next month or even next year, but, you know, I think there's going to be a wave of republicanism which will kind of result in fragmentation. And I'm thinking about Australia in particular.
Yeah.
So,
but isn't it? Yeah, it's fascinating, though. Final point to you, and then I'm desperate to get my two studio guests in on it, because what you're saying, Philip, is so on the money, and they're the royal commentators to reflect upon it. But isn't it intriguing that soft power and respect is such that a new Prime Minister of Australia, who rather likes taking every job available to himself, has a working majority, shift of politics in Australia. He's a Republican, but he says openly, on the record, on air, here in this country, now is not the time. There is still a respect for this institution around the world, And both the King and the new Prince of Wales have said to the Commonwealth, if you want to change, if you want to leave, if you want to reform, that's fine. It's up to you. That is pragmatic. It is not strategic.
Well, I suppose it is in a way, but beneath that, there is this kind of this desire to almost to charm in a way. It isn't strategic, but there's a sense there that, you know, to take on the job that the Queen did and carry on with that presence. It isn't much more than that. It's a presence, but it's absolutely vital in that respect. And I think that's the really, really important thing we talked about. You know, it's intangible, isn't it? It's this kind of intangible value that the monarch has. And if Charles can kind of run with that and make it work in the way that the Queen did, then he's going to have success, or at least he's going to put off that fragmentation, which I think eventually will happen. He's going to put it off for quite a while.
Philip, great to talk to you. Keep in touch, and I hope that over the next few days, and once all of these solemn and loving and moving events are over, we can carry on the conversations that we've so enjoyed in the past and other matters. But for the time being, Philip Gisley, thank you very much indeed. Have a great Sunday afternoon. I really enjoyed all of that conversation.
Very good.
Yes,
But let's have a final. We're going to go to the news in literally 2 minutes, and Ray's already in the studio waiting over there. But one to you and then one to you, and then we'll, if I butt in, it's because we've got to get to the news desk. Other monarchies that you mentioned right at the beginning of our coverage across Europe either didn't change enough, and you can start in 1917 if you want, and keep going, and they didn't survive. This one has changed radically for as long as I can remember, and great historians can remember, and has survived.
And I'm absolutely certain that it will in Britain. So far as the Commonwealth are concerned, you've got 14 other countries, and I think some of them will hold referenda, and they may very well become republics. Specifically in the Caribbean, it's very difficult constitutionally in Australia and Canada, for example. New Zealand needs a simple vote in Parliament and so on after a referendum. But it could undoubtedly happen. But we haven't mentioned the Prince and Princess of Wales and also their children, and they are the future of the monarchy, and it's tremendously appealing.
Yeah. All right. Don't go anywhere, because we're on air until 3 o'clock, and I've more of that brilliant and able brain to pick. So after we finish this, go and have a break, coffee, and then come back in again. You covered a lot of Commonwealth tours. You know a lot of those countries, and you know personally a lot of the former leaders and current leaders.
I do.
Was Philip right to be less optimistic about the Commonwealth?
I think I would be much more optimistic. I was at the University of South Australia in Adelaide. It was a graduation ceremony, and there was a lull in the proceedings. The Queen was presiding, and somebody at the back of the hall said, "Long live the Republic of Australia!" And my microphone picked up what the Duke of Edinburgh said, and he said, "Sounds like a good idea." Just like that. And the monarch reigns but does not rule.
Yeah.
The sovereignty lies with Westminster or with Canberra. By definition, the vote, a democratic vote of any of those countries is supported by the monarch. And what the Queen was more interested in was the Commonwealth. She loved the Commonwealth. Yes. It wasn't just a nice place to go for a holiday in the winter. Her father was instrumental in setting it up. And far from disintegrating, there are countries which have never had British rule. Mozambique, Portuguese, Rwanda, which was Belgian and German. They're joining because it's a free association of people who believe in the rule of law, democracy and freedom.
Michael, on that noble point of expansion as well as principle, we have to pause for a moment. As I said, don't go anywhere, Michael and Richard. More to go, because we are here with lots to talk about and indeed report upon right up until 3 o'clock today. You are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. The time is 31 minutes past 1. I shall be in trouble for that, because I was supposed to be saying it's 1:30. So let's bring you the latest news a minute late from Ray.
It's 31 minutes past 1. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. King Charles has held an audience with the Prime Minister. Liz Truss was at Buckingham Palace for about half an hour, the visit coming ahead of a reception for visiting heads of state this evening. US President Joe Biden, who arrived in the UK last night, will also be at the event. He's among 500 world leaders and dignitaries invited to attend the Queen's state funeral tomorrow. The Duke of York has paid tribute to the Queen, posting a photo of himself with his late mother. In a statement, Prince Andrew said, "Your Majesty, it has been an honour and privilege to serve you. Your devotion and personal service to our nation is unique and singular. Your people show their love and respect in so many different ways, and I know you are looking on, honouring their respect." He ends his message with "God save the King." A minute's silence will be held at 8 o'clock this evening to reflect on Queen Elizabeth's life ahead of the state funeral. With thousands still waiting to file past Her Majesty's coffin, the public is now being advised not to join the queue in order to avoid disappointment. Westminster Hall will close to the public at 6:30 tomorrow morning, and a 2-minute silence will also take place at 11:55 a.m. Despite the long wait, those who've made it to the other side say it was worth it.
Being in the moment for me and reflecting on my own loss, and also, of course, what the family are really going through, because it's a big loss. They've lost their grandma, they've lost a mom, and of course she is human.
As sad as it is, I think it's such a beautiful way for her to have been sent off, with the people around who have been coming countlessly for days and days and queuing up for hours and hours and hours. It's exactly what she wanted, and I think it was the perfect way to send her off.
A 28-year-old man who allegedly approached the Queen's coffin at Westminster Hall on Friday has been charged with a public order offence. Mohammed Khan will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court tomorrow. He's the second person to be charged with committing an offence while in the queue to see the Queen's coffin. Thousands of people are expected to watch the funeral on big screens across the UK. It'll be shown at public parks and venues in a number of cities. Around 125 cinemas and several cathedrals will also screen the service. Meanwhile, an image of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II walking hand in hand with her husband Prince Philip has lit up the sky over Switzerland. The moving tribute was created by Swiss light artist Jerry Hofstetter in collaboration with the UK Embassy there. Around 1 million people are expected to visit the capital today, hoping to secure a prime spot ahead of the funeral. Public transport is expected to be under pressure, with Transport for London running 250 extra rail services and national highways suspending planned motorway closures across England. Mourners are being urged to delay their return journeys to avoid overwhelming the transport network on Monday afternoon. In other news, a man has been charged after 2 police officers were stabbed in central London. The attack happened in Leicester Square at about 6 o'clock on Friday morning. One officer was stabbed in the neck and chest, and the other was stabbed in her arm. 24-year-old Mohammed Rahman, who's been charged with attempted murder and grievous bodily harm, will appear at Wimbledon Magistrates Court tomorrow. The Ministry of Defence says Russia has increased strikes against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine over the past 7 days. Officials say Moscow has ramped up attacks, even where it perceives no immediate military effect. Ukraine's electricity grid has also been hit. The MOD says several thousand long-range missiles have been fired by Russian troops since the war began in February. The Prime Minister is reportedly considering plans to cut taxes for those who live in so-called new investment zones. According to The Sun, those in the proposed low-tax areas could see their personal contributions reduced, although no final decision has yet been made. Meanwhile, people who operate businesses within those areas could also see their levies slashed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair.
On Monday, we as the United Kingdom gather to mourn, pay tribute and give thanks to Queen Elizabeth II. Here at GB News, we invite you to gather with Anne Diamond, historian David Starkey, and myself, Alastair Stewart, live from Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, all day Monday. Hello and welcome. It is 23 minutes to 2. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends, and I'm here right up until 3 o'clock. So stay with us, and we would love to hear from you. We are GBNews, and I've got 2 quick ones to share back. Ben says, I was a great fan of the late Queen, and I never thought Charles would make a great king, but I've been very pleasantly surprised at how he has taken to the position. And Cole says, Charles should train William and then step down in 7 years' time when he's 80. I don't think the House of Windsor are going to go down that road, but thanks for adding that thought. The UK, indeed the monarchy, need a younger and more in-touch king. Starting this now would also help Charles. Keep those thoughts coming in. We do want to share them, and I've got great guests here in the studio to discuss and reflect upon them. But we're out and about in the country as well as we reflect upon the life and reign of the late Queen and the challenges ahead for the new king. So let's begin that process with our reporter Anna Riley, who is at Renishaw Miners Club in Sheffield for us today. And you've been meeting a lot of folk there who are preparing for tomorrow. Mixed opinions, divided opinions, or unity of purpose?
Good afternoon, Alastair. Yes, I'm here at Renishaw Miners Club near Sheffield. There's over 900 members that come to the club, and it's been running for more than 63 years. I'm joined Sam Farnsworth, she's the director here, and there's a lot of plans being put into place for tomorrow, isn't there, to honour the Queen's life by showcasing her funeral to everybody coming to watch it here.
There is, Anna, yes. We're looking to open our doors just before 10:30 tomorrow morning, so that we can make sure that anybody in our community that wants to join us gets the full start to finish footage of the funeral procession. It's really important to us that we have got that offering to the community. I think we might have considered closing for about 1 second, but then it was definitely we were going to open. And we want to open because we've got a lot of people that live in our village and community that live on their own. And we wanted to make sure that they don't spend tomorrow on their own. They can choose to, but if they want to be with their friends, the community, then they can come down here, join us and join in what will be a really sad occasion, but also one for us to mark the Queen's amazing duty and life and then celebrate her.
And what did the Queen mean to you, and what's the sense that you get here from people? Are there a lot of royalists, or are there a lot of people that are still coming to pay their respects even if they didn't follow royalty so much?
Yeah, definitely both. So a lot of people that would consider themselves as royalists, but also a lot of people that have perhaps never even thought about whether they are or not, but want to mark the Queen's life and her duty, and also just out of respect be here and just join the rest of the community and the village to pay their respects. Yeah.
And what does it mean to you, the Queen, and having tomorrow to pay respects with the community?
So for me, it was really important. I was so pleased when most businesses, industries, all the supermarkets made that decision that they were going to close, because it allows everybody to be able to share in what's happening tomorrow. Me personally, I have followed what's happening. I was really shocked, but also filled with, I suppose, real devastation at the Queen's passing. Never did I think that it was going to happen so quickly. So for me, I have been in mourning for the last week and a half, and I want to make sure that I am able to see from start to finish tomorrow the whole funeral what the Queen did for us, her consistent approach and support to the nation. We've heard it 1,000 times over the last week or so, but she pledged on her 21st birthday that that's what she was going to do, and by goodness has she kept to her word.
She certainly has. Thank you, Sam. So yes, Alastair, there'll be a lot gathering in mourning, but also to celebrate the Queen's life here tomorrow, and there's also going to be the National Moments Silence held here later this evening.
Anna and your lovely guest, thank you both very much indeed. Fascinating stuff there for us to chew over, and that bang, bang you heard in the background, just as I was saying thank you to Anna and her guest, was the Officer of the Watch, and it happens every 20 minutes there in Westminster Hall as the queues continue to process through. He does bang, 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 and then the new guards come in, they change over, the old ones go out, and I'm told that they then have to literally lie down for a wee while so that their blood circulation gets back into some kilter, because they've been standing there not only to attention but actually motionless for 20 minutes. It's a physical challenge as well as a great emotional duty for all of those soldiers and gentlemen yeomen of the guard and even the Royal Company of Archers from Scotland. So let's continue our tour around the United Kingdom. I'm delighted now to cross live to my friend and our reporter, Sophie Reaper. There she is at Lancaster Castle Priory for us today. How do you gauge the mood there, Sophie? We've spoken a couple of times as these events have unfolded, and I remember well one particular standout conversation which you reminded me and folk at home about that intimate relationship between Lancaster and the Duchy of Lancaster with the Crown and the Prince of Wales.
Well, Alastair, I remember that conversation very well as well, and of course, as you say, the Queen is known here as the Queen, but also more specifically as the Duke of Lancaster, and that's something that people here feel a real special link to the Queen when they think about. Now, here today, as a result of this, in the Priory, which is here just in front of me, they're going to be having a special Sunday service. Now, it's going to have everything that you might expect: choir singing, prayers, and of course readings. But one thing that's going to make it very special is that it's being dedicated to the late Queen. Now, once that's finished, we're then going to be moving to the gates of Lancaster Castle, which is just behind me, and here they're going to be having an interfaith candlelit vigil. Now, that's quite significant because, of course, although the Queen was the head of the church, she was also head of state, and that represents many Commonwealth countries where, of course, people are from a variety of different faiths and backgrounds, colours and religions. So it's really quite important that the Priory here at Lancaster Castle felt it necessary to have that candlelit vigil as interfaith in order to give people from across the community, across the spectrum, the opportunity to come down this evening and give a prayer to the late Majesty and remember her here as the Queen, but also as the Duke of Lancaster.
Very much indeed for that, Sophie, and keep in touch with developments and reactions, and I'm sure I'll be having the chance to talk to you tomorrow as well. That's Sophie Reaper there at Lancaster Castle Priory. Still with me, I'm delighted to say, are Richard and Michael, my studio guests. Two, I don't know what you clocked there particularly, but I jotted down two things that really surprised me, because I said to the team when they told me that Anna was going to be at a miners' club up north, I said, well, that'll very, very interesting to see what the reactions. And again, we keep talking about what stories we've covered in the past. And one of my first big events as an industrial correspondent at ITN was the miners' strike. And goodness me, there was division. But that woman who ran the club there, let's start with you, Richard, and then Michael, she said, yes, there will be royalists here, of course, working-class royalists, no shock or surprise in that, but also others who are simply here to watch it out of respect.
Yes, obviously, I think one would accept that the Queen and respect for her, affection for her, completely transcends any sort of party political issues, or indeed whether or not you at heart might happen to be a Republican, perhaps because your parents were, or perhaps because you decided that was for you. I mean, I don't think that enters into it emotionally for somebody, for example, like me, and the way I respond to it and the way those who are the mourners who are filing past do. But I think just very, very broadly, the Queen was someone who attracted universal admiration. Yes. And I mean, you know, there was some discussion.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the fascinating divisions, is the degree to which it was the late Queen as a magnet for affection and, quotes, just folk wanting to pay their respect, and the institution. But the polling suggests that the affection and support for the institution is as strong as ever. And if it's around 60-65%, although I think, as you said yesterday, it's down slightly from the heyday of 70, one of you, that must mean that an awful lot of working class folk, natural perhaps Labour Party supporters, still like this crazy, crazy institution.
No politician in the free world, it's different behind various iron curtains, has ever had an approval rating as high as the monarchy has. And all this pageantry has a real purpose, as you quite clearly can see here. Of course, it's for a people, her peoples around the world in her various realms, to say farewell, a final farewell. And it's also, in a way, a farewell to the 20th century, because she epitomised that. She knew everybody. She was born in 1926, the year of the general strike, went through the Second World War, has seen what she saw over the last 70 years as a monarch. But it also underpins and supports a constitutional monarchy, which we are fortunate enough to live in. And that's very, very important. And when you see young people coming out, I think they're getting it. They understand the value of stability. Less happy lands than ours have suffered from this. And a constitutional monarch is a tremendous defence, a bulwark against extremism. Because at the end of the day, the Prime Minister has to go once a week to talk to the monarch about what's going on. And at the end of the day, the monarch has to sign off the legislation. And you could foresee a situation where you had a deplorable regime where there would be a clash of crown.
Well, let me bring Richard in at exactly that point, because what I love about this is when they're friends of mine, I know where we're going and I can follow the logic. My job is merely to pass the baton on. But he's absolutely 100%. And we began our conversation today talking about Spain and Felipe being here and Leticia, but also Juan Carlos. And let me utter the two words Franco and fascism. There was a great and beautiful country, Iberian Peninsula. We've already talked about Waterloo and that particular battle in those days, going right back to that time. A fabulous country that embraced a monarchy but did not see the need for change. Franco saw a window of opportunity, and there followed years of ghastly hideousness until they restored the monarchy as a constitutional monarchy.
Which Juan Carlos was personally responsible for, and all credit to him, although tragically, subsequently...
Well, it takes us slightly back to our Duke of York conversation, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
You've got to get it right and get it right the whole time.
No, but I mean, especially the PR aspects of this, not to mention the allegations and rumours. It really was something that was truly sad. A fall that you could say, linked to a hunting trip in Botswana and various reports about his personal life. I mean, when it became on the monetary scale of it was so deplorable. But you're mentioning actually monarchy and the purpose. I'm picking up on what Michael was saying. To me, what is so significant is this aspect of the power that's denied to others in a constitutional monarchy. Not so much the power the monarch wields, because obviously they're not, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and head of the church and the civil service and judiciary, but what others don't have. Therefore, I can't foresee. I mean, Queen Anne was the last monarch to veto a bill on the Scottish militia in 1706. So I wouldn't anticipate something like that. Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament, that was one example which was ruled illegal by 11 judges.
I pause simply to say I'm not 100% sure, but I'm being told by my team that we think that was the Justin Trudeau group leaving Downing Street. We'll get some confirmation.
Who made an excellent speech upon the Queen's death. Very moving. And, huge country, second biggest country in the world, Canada. What was it held together by the Canadian National Railway going across the whole country and Her Majesty the Queen, because although she didn't go to school, she speaks perfect French. President Macron has...
I think we both did her visit when Mulrooney was taking on the Quebecois.
Exactly.
And that was one of the only few times where Her Majesty did say Canada together is better than Canada apart.
Of course, and that was after General de Gaulle went to Quebec, went to Montreal, and from the City Hall said, "Vive le Québec libre, long live free Quebec." And she was very important, and even at the height of the separatism, she continued to go to Canada, as she continued to go as often as she could to Ireland throughout those troubles. I mean, that is the value of having a monarch who is above politics.
Right. Thank you both very much indeed. You are earning your crust today, for which I'm eternally grateful, not only with brilliant and erudite reflections, but allowing me to interrupt you occasionally so that we don't lose a link to somebody else whose thoughts that we want to hear from. Because here at GB News, we are aware, as you look at live pictures of the lying in state there, that there are other things happening here at home and indeed around the world. And here indeed is one of them, and it's really very important. NHS England has told GP practices that they can close for the Queen's funeral. Many of you have reacted with surprise and shock and concern, while others have embraced the fact that NHS workers, particularly the heroes and heroines of the coronavirus, will be involved tomorrow at the state funeral. So let's just reflect upon that for a moment or two with Dr. Ellie Cannon, who joins me live. And there she is. Ellie, first of all, profound apologies, because I think we did have a few technical hiccups, which meant I kept you waiting longer than I would have chosen to. So I'm a man of manners, I hope, and honesty. So there we are. My apologies for that. Do doctors, and particularly GPs, welcome that gesture? Or as people who care passionately about their patients, do some of them feel it might just be a gesture too far?
Well, it's pretty difficult, and there's two sides to this coin. First of all, we can't really be open as a GP surgery if the rest of the country has a bank holiday, and that's because we rely on a lot of logistics. We need pharmacies to be open, we need childcare places to be open, so there's lots of, we sort of can't operate in isolation. So it's very difficult for us to be open if no one else is. That's the first thing to say. But obviously we cope with bank holidays all the time in the NHS. The trouble with this is that obviously it was incredibly last minute. And so people already had appointments booked. I have a patient who is booked for tomorrow to have a long-awaited joint replacement operation in the NHS, which is now cancelled. And that must be sort of repeated thousands of times over around the country. So I think it's a sort of last minute nature of it. I know in my practice, we all felt sort of quite uncomfortable about cancelling all our patients. And there are sort of questions around why the funeral couldn't actually have been done on a Sunday, which would have avoided this.
And that's an additional thought which we may well come back to. But I want to pick out something important that you said there in the middle, and it may be because I've been reading too much about regiments and processions and things of that nature. But you said you had a patient who was expecting a hip replacement operation, which by definition is a hospital thing. I began the conversation saying GPs have been told that they can close if they want because it's a bank holiday. So it's across the spectrum of the NHS.
Oh, it's absolutely across the spectrum, from sort of people like me in primary care, pharmacies, GPs, everything in primary care. If you have physiotherapy in the community, all of those sort of type of things, district nurses, people who come into your home to look after you, all of that, all the way through to hospital treatment. Routine operations are cancelled for tomorrow. Routine appointments are cancelled for tomorrow, from what I understand. Chemotherapy and cancer operations and emergency care is all going ahead. So it really is like a Christmas Day type service within the NHS. except with very little notice. That's the difference.
Yeah, no, well, that bows back or nods back to your point about perhaps if the funeral could have been on a Sunday, then it would have been less of a problem. But let's agree, Ellie, you and me, that we park that one there for other folk to think about and reflect, because I don't feel terribly strongly about it one way or the other. Tell you what I do feel strongly about, and you'll answer it brilliantly because you are a GP, primary care expert, is clearly, although it's a bank holiday, completely take that point, illness and accidents won't take a pause. These things still happen. As a professional, what should folk listening to this conversation or watching it do? God forbid they themselves have a domestic accident, or one of their children suddenly mysteriously falls ill, or grandma falls over and loses her balance. What's the code of practice if, God forbid, something horrible goes wrong tomorrow?
So depending on the severity of what's gone wrong, you've got 111 who will give you an idea of where to go. There are urgent care centres open. So I know GP colleagues who often work out of hours or on sort of urgent care centres. Urgent GP centres will be open. They're often based in hospitals. People tend to know where they are in their local area, or you can look it up online. Obviously, A&E is open. Obviously, the ambulance service doesn't stop. So all of those sort of things don't stop. I think some emergency pharmacies will be open. So it's really like a weekend service.
All right, Ellie, great to talk to you. And again, my apologies for keeping you waiting. I'm glad we sorted out the technical problems. Keep in touch. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Ellie Cannon there with her thoughts. So a lot of it will still be functioning. And those emergency phone numbers will still be functioning, which is terribly important. Prime Minister Liz Truss is meeting world leaders at Downing Street this afternoon. We've already seen Justin Trudeau come, and we think go. But let's get right up to speed now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is at Downing Street for us now. Latest runners and riders, Darren.
Yeah, indeed. As you say, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, has been in Downing Street. He literally left a couple of minutes ago. Liz Truss meeting many of the world leaders who are in town effectively for that funeral service. Tomorrow she's expected to meet the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, later on, alongside the Polish President, President Duda, as well. There was due to be a meeting, though, later on this afternoon between the new Prime Minister and Joe Biden, the US President, inside Downing Street. However, that's been somewhat postponed to a full bilateral meeting that we're expecting to see at the United Nations when the Prime Minister is there later on this week in New York. So there is going to be that meeting, but it's just going to be in a couple of days' time rather than Downing Street. Interestingly, though, we've got this big reception, don't we, Alastair, for those world leaders tonight. 500 in attendance alongside their partners, so 1,000 people really expected at Buckingham Palace. Everyone from the President of India through to the King of Spain and the King of Belgium to the Vice President of China. I could go on. There's going to be a lot of the great and good, possibly the greatest gathering of world leaders this country has ever seen, maybe even globally as well, certainly since the state funeral of Winston Churchill back in 1965. And we've already seen some of those world leaders gather actually in Westminster Hall to pay their own tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. Some others have travelled to Lancaster House to sign the Book of Condolence to Her Majesty as well. And so it is a busy day politically. We talked a little about this yesterday, didn't we? You know, it is an opportune moment, maybe in the most saddest of times, or solemn of times, for the UK to flex a little bit of its soft power on the diplomatic stage, given the fact that so many important people are here. So Liz Truss is also going to travel a little bit later on from Downing Street to Buckingham Palace for an audience, another audience with the King, alongside the Cabinet as well, who will be in attendance at that official function a little later on this evening.
Brilliant, Darren. Absolutely everything we need to know. I just on terms of your analogy, Michael Cole here in the studio with me says it's the biggest gathering since the conference for the Treaty of Vienna.
How are you?
Now, I'm stopping because things are happening here. That's the Deputy Prime Minister. Over to Darren.
That's Therese Coffey.
Yeah, Therese Coffey just arriving inside Downing Street this afternoon. Again, you know, it is interesting that in many ways, isn't it, Alastair, that and we're going to see people coming in and out of the street quite a lot today. The government is in some ways quite suspended. Yes, there's the functions, the everyday stuff happening, but lots of the big kind of policy announcements have been put on hold. And the Deputy Prime Minister will be at that reception later, but be in no doubt when the funeral ends tomorrow, when the National Day of Mourning ends tomorrow, the government is going to have to start hitting the ground running again. There are some big decisions to be made this week, not least of all a big fiscal event they're expecting on Friday around taxation. So the government, at the moment, still in that national period of mourning, that will very much come to an end on Tuesday morning.
Yeah, fascinating to see the Deputy Prime Minister go in there, and as you rightly say, Health Secretary. I was just talking to Ellie Cannon, a GP, about a bit of a row that's taking place tomorrow with the Health Service. Has been told it too can enjoy the bank holiday, but as Ellie said, perhaps with not quite enough planning. There we go. Busy in trays for all of them. Darren, keep in touch. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey there, live in Downing Street. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. It's 2.5 minutes past 1. Today marks the final day of the Queen's coffin lying in state at Westminster Hall ahead of her state funeral tomorrow. Do stay with us and do please share your thoughts and reflections with us here at GB News, TV and radio. Hello and welcome to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. I know, and you know, that in fact it is now 4 minutes past 2 and not as it was 2 minutes ago, 2 minutes past 1. It's one of those mornings, forgive me, but I'm delighted that one of my friends in the studio says, you might want to correct that in case they're watching or waiting for somebody. There's so much happening today, you won't miss a thing. And I endeavour for the next hour to get the time right when I share it with you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can do it by sending us an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at gbnews, or you can tweet me personally. We've shared a few already, and we would love to share some more. I'm with you, as I say, with friends right up until 3 o'clock today. So thanks very much indeed for being with us. Still in the studio with me is former BBC correspondent Michael Cole, and delighted to be joined now as well by Grant Harold, who is a former royal butler to King Charles, to Prince William, and indeed to Prince Harry. Thank you, Michael, for being resilient and still with us. And
time passes quickly, Alastair, when you're having a good conversation.
Well, and what wonderful guests. I mean, we've had some terrific people, and Grant simply adds to that. One thing that we were just quietly sharing on that break before we came back live, we are now live, is what the late Queen would have made, not only that conversation that I had with the good GP about shutting down the NHS and what have you, but it reminded me of something that the new Prince of Wales is widely reported as having shared with those people in those lovely scenes yesterday in the crowd, and I quote, the Queen wouldn't have believed all of this.
No, absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. I mean, she didn't like any fuss. Didn't like any fuss at all. She just liked things to be simple, straightforward, and I was actually thinking, looking at those crowds, what on earth would she be probably embarrassed. She'd probably be kind of saying there's no need for all of this. But equally, it would mean so much obviously to her to know that that's what people are doing. I mean, they're queuing for it.
Would she unequivocally have approved of what her son and her grandson did yesterday?
Yes. Absolutely, I think so. Yes, I mean, I thought it was wonderful to see that. I mean, it is very much, you know, the line of state, as we know, is not a new thing, but what is it, about over 100 years it's been done. And I think every time we see slight differences to what the royal family do. And this is obviously now, I think, going forward, something that they will do. And I think it's nice that they do it. I think it's really nice.
I just want to butt in, because we're looking at the pictures there, that the guy on the left with the lovely beard there is one of the bodyguards.
Yes.
Actually saying to the crowd, you know, hey, put the mobile phones down, enjoy the moment, cherish the moment.
Yes, which I think is important. You know, I think that's the thing. People get so carried away now with all that's going on. There's going to be lots of footage of this. You know, the people there should be actually enjoying that moment, especially talking to the King and the
Michael.
family.
The Queen actually hated fuss, and she would have been really quite upset that there's been inconvenience, particularly with the NHS put on a sort of care and maintenance basis over this bank holiday Monday. But, you know, the job was grand. She wasn't grand. She was, in fact, a rather modest person in many, many ways. And she said so to her closest friends. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about equestrianism and we were talking about saddles and so on earlier. She was a countrywoman at heart, and she was never happier than dressed in a pair of jodhpurs and a hacking jacket with a scarf tied under her chin, jogging down to the Royal Stud in Sandringham to watch the finer points of the stallions covering the mares.
But the thing I loved, particularly from Adrian, the saddler, and Buttons, you may or may not have come across him before, but a royal warrant holder. And I knew from a mutual friend that it wasn't just the business of building beautiful saddles, fitting them, discussing what was required with the late Queen. He confirmed what I'd heard on the grapevine was that every now and then she'd throw a tea party for the saddlers, for the farriers, for the men and women who roll their sleeves up and get mud and other stuff under their fingernails. And he said she talked about horses with a knowledge that few others anywhere in the world have, but everything else as well. It was a tea party, or even occasionally it was a supper party.
This doesn't surprise me, because this is what the Queen was like. You know, I remember, especially in Scotland, you know, everyone loved the Queen, you know, when she was at Balmoral, and it was often you had people going and visiting, having tea with people, just things that a lot of other people probably didn't expect. But, you know, she was very down to earth, and she did things like the rest of us, but you sometimes forget that she was the Queen. You know, I remember I used to bump into her on the Balmoral estate, often just out for a walk, as you've mentioned, just dressed down, headscarf. We didn't even know who it was. It was the corgis that normally gave it away. You saw the corgis and I thought, oh, the Queen's around.
I've shared this once before, but one of my favourite stories, and it was a Royal Windsor Horse Show, was two young girls looking at the showing pony classes, debating fiercely whether the grey or the chestnut was going to be the one that would win. And this little voice behind said, I think it's the grey. And it was the great authority. Grant, great to have you with us. Do stay with us, please, right up for as long as you can. And Michael, God, you've played a blinder today, but I hope you continue so to do. From horses' tea parties to the Conference of Vienna. It's been an education. Let's bring you right up to date with things that are going on outside the studio and outside Westminster Hall, and cross live once again to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who is at Buckingham Palace for us today. The King meeting Liz Truss and respective foreign counterparts, but give us the bill of fare for the rest of today and the run-up particularly to tomorrow.
Yep, a busy diary, Alastair, for the King over the next few hours. Like you said, he's had a private meeting with the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, very early on this afternoon, actually, followed by another meeting with various Prime Ministers of the realms where the King reigns as head of state, including the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea. So at 6 o'clock tonight, we're expecting, as Darren was talking about a few minutes ago, lots and lots of world leaders at Buckingham Palace for this diplomatic reception hosted by His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort. We're expecting other members of the royal family to also attend. We know the United States President Joe Biden is on British soil. He's very likely to to attend. Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, and several crowned heads of Europe are all expected to be there. And the Queen had this wonderful kind of power of soft diplomacy, bringing countries together and promoting British interests abroad without getting too political. And no doubt His Majesty the King is going to be endeavouring to do exactly the same as Her Majesty the Queen did for 70 years or so. So moving on to tomorrow, Her Majesty the Queen, as we know, is still lying in state, as we're seeing on the screen now, at Westminster Hall. That's going to continue until about 6:30 tomorrow morning, where Westminster Hall will be closed and Her Majesty's coffin will be prepared for her funeral. And then at about 11:15 or so, she's going to be taken from the hall and placed onto the State gun carriage of the Royal Navy. It was first used for Queen Victoria's funeral in 1901, and it also carried Edward VII's coffin, George V, George VI, and Winston Churchill's, just to give you a sense of the history of this particular gun carriage. She'll then be taken to Westminster Abbey, where a congregation of 2,000 or so people will be there for the funeral, and people from all walks of life. We'll see George Cross holders, we'll see Victoria Cross holders, representatives of Her Majesty's charities in which she was patron, a number of politicians, those world leaders who will be at Buckingham Palace this evening will also most likely be at Westminster Abbey for Her Majesty's funeral. Then there will be a big procession through central London, up the Mall here and past Constitution Hill behind me, of Her Majesty's coffin on that gun carriage following the funeral. There will then be a committal service at Windsor, at St George's Chapel, followed by a private burial for Her Majesty the Queen's family in the kind of an annex of St George's Chapel, the George VI Memorial Chapel, where we expect her to be buried with her husband in private, surrounded just by Her Majesty's family.
Thank you very much indeed. Cameron Walker there on the left of your screen, live at Buckingham Palace, and on the right of your screen, the Royal Palace of Westminster, better known perhaps to a lot of you as the Houses of Parliament, which indeed it is, both House of Commons and House of Lords, but it is a royal palace, Palace of Westminster, and that is where the late Queen lies there in state and will remain there, as Cameron so rightly said, until not around about 10:30 or around about 11 o'clock, until precisely 10:44, and then to a very fine and detailed timetable, all of these great events will unfold before your very eyes, right up until 7:30 at Windsor Castle. I was very struck yesterday by something that the Earl Marshal said, and that was that the detail has been incredibly precise, down literally to the last moment, but the game plan, every detail of it had been approved by the late Queen herself, whether it was the Canadian Mounties leading a part of it because of her love and affection for Canada, or whether it was indeed the use of the gun carriage, or even the fact that it is taking place at Westminster Abbey and not at Windsor.
I mean, every detail the Queen, it's the same with other members of the royal family, they're fully aware of what's happening. I found it also interesting that Operation Unicorn in Scotland, she was involved in the planning for that as well. And part of me also wondered, obviously with her health declining, she'd be fully aware, I'm guessing, if she knew that her time was coming, she was aware that this was what was going to happen. So the Queen was, you know, when it came to the planning of things, everything, you know, she was involved in everything.
Yeah.
Even the household with the dinner parties, she used to inspect the table. She was the last person to inspect the table.
But the other thing that the Duke of Norfolk, Earl Marshal, said, and again, I keep nodding to how long you've been involved in this business of... Oh, I'm sorry, we've got to break off. Hold that thought, because we're going to Mark White, our national home editor and security editor. I don't know why. I'm just being told we have to go there because he has a breaking story, I'm told. Mark, over to you in Westminster.
Good afternoon, Alastair. Yes, no breaking story, just an update really on the security situation, which is really being ramped up now ahead of what will be a lot of activity involving world leaders and other VIPs heading towards, of course, the culmination this evening in that reception that's being held at Buckingham Palace, where hundreds of state leaders and VIPs will be going down to Buckingham Palace, and we're seeing a lot of security activity around this area in Westminster, understandably. We're told that at Westminster Hall there will be a VIP arrival in the coming hour. So the security has been ramped up significantly for that. As you would imagine, snipers on the roof, spotters on the roofs of buildings, explosives experts going through the local area, checking lampposts, bins, even where the television crews are, checking where all the wires are going, making sure that everything is in order. It is a very significant policing operation. We heard from Stuart Cundy, who is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Metropolitan Police and in charge effectively of this operation, that it will be the biggest event come Monday, the biggest single event ever undertaken by Scotland Yard, and in guarding all of these VIPs and world leaders, the biggest single security operation ever undertaken. Thousands of officers, many from forces right across the country. In fact, we're told that there's barely one force in the country that is not represented here in the capital in this policing operation. In addition to the police, the armed services are helping out. Several thousand members of the armed services helping out in a security capacity and manning the cordon along the route of the funeral procession on Monday. In addition to that, of course, thousands of soldiers, sailors and airmen will also be taking part in the procession itself. I've been looking back, Alastair, at the links between the military and the monarch. For 7 decades, she was their commander-in-chief. And now her armed forces are preparing to show just how much the late monarch meant to them. Meticulous rehearsals here at RAF Holton in Buckinghamshire and many military bases across the country as these young men and women prepare for what will undoubtedly be the biggest honour of their lives, helping lead the late Queen's funeral procession through the streets of the capital.
Immensely proud. It's a huge honour. Having the world's eyes on what's going on is really a privilege. It's quite a humbling experience that I'm just a small part in this huge tribute to Her Majesty the Queen.
It's something that I won't forget, my children won't forget, their children won't forget. This isn't just about this generation, this will go on for so many generations, and to know that I will be a part of that history, it makes me quite emotional. It does, it kind of gets you, it does.
The monarch's link to the military is profound, as of course they lead the men and women who've sworn to protect them. For the late Queen, the links run deeper still. She was the first royal to become a full-time active member of the armed forces when the then Princess Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service in 1945. Her own husband and other members of her family also served for a time in the forces. The former head of the army, General Lord Dannatt, still remembers the oath he took to serve the Queen on the 28th of August 1969.
It's one of the things I think that sets the armed forces a little bit apart, in that when we join the Royal Navy, the British Army, the Royal Air Force, the first thing we do is swear an oath of allegiance to the sovereign, not to the government, not to the Prime Minister, not to the Secretary of State for Defence.
In recent days, through the streets around Westminster Abbey and Buckingham Palace, as most of the nation slept, Many hundreds of military personnel have continued their rehearsals. Marching along the planned route of the funeral procession, everything perfectly timed and choreographed. The pressure to get it right on the day is enormous.
I've got absolutely no doubt that they'll be very, very pleased to have been there and participating on such a momentous occasion.
Over the years, the UK's armed forces have demonstrated just how this nation excels when it comes to these big state occasions. But not since Winston Churchill's death have we seen a full-blown state funeral. Huge pressure then on the shoulders of these young servicemen and women. But it will also be their proudest moment as they escort their Commander-in-Chief, their late Queen, towards her final resting place. Mark White, GB News.
Mark White there and still with us. Fascinating mixture there of the old black and white stuff and what's been happening. And crack of dawn, dead of night rehearsals. Are they there yet, Mark, or is there just one more bit of rehearsal to go before tomorrow morning?
Oh, you know, the military, they'll be rehearsing right up to the very last moment. They're continuing to do that. They want to get this absolutely perfect. They will do their very best as they accompany the coffin of the late monarch from Westminster Abbey up Whitehall, across Horse Guards, down the Mall and then up towards Wellington Arch, where of course the procession as such doesn't end there on foot. It maybe does, but it's then transferred to the state hearse and the coffin then makes its way to Windsor, taking A Road, so there will still be opportunity for people to line the route to get a glimpse and to say a final farewell to Queen Elizabeth II as she makes her way towards that committal ceremony at Windsor Castle itself. It really is incredible. There'll be about 6,000, we're told, members of the military who will be involved in that procession, and we really haven't seen the likes of that since the 1965 state funeral of Sir Winston Churchill. And there will be many, many people, not just here in the capital, but all around the world, watching this. Some 4 billion, it's estimated, will be watching this on television. Of course, in the Commonwealth countries, it meant so much to the monarch, but in every country all around the world, people will be tuned in because she was such an important figure in many lives all around the globe.
Mark White, thank you very much indeed. Mark there with his report and also live from just outside the Palace of Westminster. Delighted to say that former Royal Butler Grant Harold is still here with me in the studio, and Michael Cole, who I butted in with what I thought was breaking news, but it was an update rather than a piece of breaking news, but these things happen. But terrific detail there from Mark about what the military are doing within the crowd as well as streetliners. But what I was going to say to you before that, and it still fits perfectly, is that it's hardly surprising that the detail is indeed perfection, because this plan has been in the works for as long as either of us and everyone else can remember.
It's one thing to have a plan, Alastair, and it's another thing to execute it impeccably. And that is what we're witnessing, and it is awe-inspiring. At the Jubilee, I was appearing on an American news network, and I explained to the two women presenters, I said, these guys in the red tunics, they're frontline soldiers. The guys on the horses, they drive tanks when it comes to war. And they were absolutely flabbergasted. They thought they were there for ceremonial purposes. And indeed, the bearer party from the Grenadier Guards, the 1st Regiment of Foot, these guys were, a few weeks ago, in Afghanistan, guarding the embassy there. And you mentioned earlier the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They will be here. They will get a huge cheer with their red tunics. Burmese, the horse that the Queen rode, side saddle, for many, many years. That was provided. It was a gift from the Mounties, from their base in Regina, in Saskatchewan. And when that horse retired, it was more or less when she went to start a carriage for the Trooping of the Colour. I went down. He lived in a police barracks in Pimlico. And I went down and filmed, and I waited for all the other cameras to go. And then when they'd gone, we decorated the horse with tinsel. It was Christmas, and that was the last shot in the news, Burmese retiring. And the Queen absolutely adored that horse because he was so placid.
Oh, she was brilliant on it as well, because she was on Burmese when the gun was fired in the crowd at Trooping the Colour.
Correct.
Just as the picture there we're playing out live from Westminster Hall, just to underline Michael's really important point that the guys dressed up in well, there's another one of them about to do the rat-a-tat-tat in their red tunics, but also breastplates and hats that wouldn't have looked out of place in parts of the Roman Empire. They drive tanks. They are gunners, scimitars, warriors, and then they put that stuff on when, as one of their commanding officers said the other day to me, we defend our country to a world-class level, but we also do ceremonial to a world-class level. Also, just as a footnote to it, the Royal Company of Archers as well includes people like the Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace, who himself was a serving officer in the Scots Guards, and also many of the gentlemen yeomen, the Beefeaters. They were servicemen, active servicemen and women now, before all of this. Changing tack very slightly, Grant, but sticking with that important theme. I mentioned the Earl Marshal, top of the tree, as courtier, because, I mean, that's what he is. And then you also have the Lord Great Chamberlain, and that changed recently from to Lord Carrington, the son of the late Foreign Secretary, one of our greatest ever Foreign Secretaries, Peter Carrington. All the way across the spectrum, the households are engaged in all of this planning stuff as well.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, as a former member of the Royal Household, you're aware of that. And the military side of it's quite huge, if I can say that, because a lot of the people that I've worked with have got military background. So, and the higher up you go, the more senior those positions are from the military. So and it works quite well with the royal family, because obviously it is members of the royal family and military background as well. So, the household do play a huge part in what we're all seeing with working with other departments, government departments, because to put something like this on, it's as we all know, it's a huge thing.
Sure. And when I introduced you, I said you worked with the former Prince of Wales, now King, but also William and Harry.
Yes.
Everybody out there who's interested in these matters knows that there was a tricky story, and that was about notice being served. Some of the people working in Clarence House, as the then resident of Clarence House moves across to Buckingham Palace, and the then Prince of Wales had his own court, his own group of servants and supporters. He now gets a different pack within his role as king, and ditto, William does that and what have you. That happens occasionally. The problem for people like you and those who followed in your footsteps is it hasn't happened for a long time.
No, it hasn't. And I had to kind of speak up a little bit on that recently, because there was so much confusion that people thought that the new king had just automatically fired people. And I said, it's not like that at all. Quite simply, in our contracts, it states that you're employed by the Prince of Wales, and when he's no longer the Prince of Wales, your contract comes to an end. It doesn't mean to say they kick you out. It's a case of then some people retire, maybe they felt it's time to retire, get to a certain age, retire. Some people move into other departments, some jobs will get job shared. There's all sorts of what happening. So I tried to explain that so people don't think he hasn't just gone, right, everyone is out. And he's not in control of it. He's no longer the Prince of Wales.
And if there are any people who will try their very best to make it as smooth and painless as possible, it is certainly the new king and the new Prince of Wales. We will pause now. The time is just a few seconds past 2:30, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GBNews TV and radio. It is the 14th and final day of the Queen's coffin lying in state ahead of her state funeral tomorrow. We'll be bringing you all of the very latest, but let's bring you right up to date now with the rest of the news headlines, including that story, but other things happen in the world as well. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alastair. Coming up to 31 minutes past 2, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. King Charles has held an audience with the Prime Minister. Liz Truss was at Buckingham Palace for about half an hour, the visit coming ahead of a reception for visiting heads of state this evening. US President Joe Biden, who arrived in the UK last night, will also be at the event. He's among 500 world leaders and dignitaries invited to attend the Queen's state funeral tomorrow. The Duke of York has paid tribute to the Queen, releasing a photo of himself with his late mother. In a statement, Prince Andrew said, "Your Majesty, it has been an honour and privilege to serve you. Your devotion and personal service to our nation is unique and singular. Your people show their love and respect in so many different ways, and I know you are looking on, honouring their respect." He ends his message with, "God save the King." A minute's silence will be held at 8 o'clock this evening to reflect on Queen Elizabeth's life ahead of the state funeral. With thousands still waiting to file past Her Majesty's coffin, the public is being advised not to join the queue in order to avoid disappointment. Waiting times currently stand at 11.5 hours. Westminster Hall will close to the public at 6:30 tomorrow morning, and a 2-minute silence will also take place at 11:55 a.m. Despite the long wait, those who've made it to the other side say it was worth it.
Being in the moment for me and reflecting on my own loss, and also, of course, what the family are really going through, because it's a big loss. They've lost their grandma, they've lost a mom, and of course she is human.
As sad as it is, I think it's such a beautiful way for her to have been sent off, with the people around who have been coming countlessly for days and days and queuing up for hours and hours and hours. It's exactly what she wanted, and I think it was the perfect way to send her off.
A 28-year-old man who allegedly approached the Queen's coffin at Westminster Hall on Friday has been charged with a public order offence. Mohammed Khan will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court tomorrow. He's the second person to be charged with committing an offence while in the queue to see the Queen's coffin. Thousands of people are expected to watch the funeral on big screens across the United Kingdom. It will be shown at public parks and venues in a number of cities. Around 125 cinemas and several cathedrals will also screen the service. Well, meanwhile, an image of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II walking hand in hand with her husband Prince Philip has lit up the sky over Switzerland. The moving tribute was created by Swiss light artist Jerry Hofstetter in collaboration with the UK Embassy there. To other news, and a man has been charged after 2 police officers were stabbed in central London. The attack happened in Leicester Square at around 6 o'clock on Friday morning. One officer was stabbed in his neck and chest, and the other was stabbed in her arm. 24-year-old Mohammed Rahman, who's been charged with attempted murder and grievous bodily harm, will appear at Wimbledon Magistrates Court tomorrow. The Ministry of Defence says Russia has increased strikes against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine over the past 7 days. Officials say Moscow has ramped up attacks, even where it perceives no immediate military effect. Ukraine's electricity grid has also been hit. The MOD says several thousand long-range missiles have been fired by Russia since the war began in February. And the Prime Minister is reportedly considering plans to cut taxes for those who live in, quote, new investment zones. According to The Sun, those in the proposed low tax areas could see their personal contributions reduced, although no final decision has been made. Meanwhile, people who operate businesses within those same areas could also see their levies slashed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. As you heard there in Ray's news bulletin, one of the last stories was about politics slowly but surely getting back to normal with the fiscal statement on Friday and that talk about tax cuts for people who live in particular parts of the world. There's a huge political agenda that's been put on pause whilst we reflect upon and celebrate the life of the late Queen and welcome and wish well to the new King and his family at this difficult time. Not least, however, on that busy and delicate agenda is the question of Northern Ireland, of Brexit and the protocol. The Republic of Ireland's President, Michael D. Higgins, and the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, Michael Martin, will be among the foreign dignitaries attending the Queen's state funeral tomorrow. Since her death, political leaders from both the Republic of Ireland and indeed from Northern Ireland have been hailing the Queen's efforts to calm divisions. So we've been seeking to reflect that throughout all of our programmes, and none better at doing that than Duchy Beattie, who is at Hillsborough Castle again for us today. We were talking about that delicate balance with Cameron earlier about the President and the Taoiseach being there and whether they are there purely to pay their respects or whether they might just have a quiet word in the sidelines, as it were, with either Liz Truss or the Foreign Secretary. Your take on that?
Well, that's the way it always is, actually. I listened to David Starkey, a very learned man, on the day that St Anne's Cathedral was taking place here, the service for the Queen, and he was saying during that time of them waiting for the King Charles to arrive, there would be many conversations had. That is the way politics moves. It breathes that way, and that's what the whole invitation to Sinn Féin has been about. It's been saying to them, look, you need Britain. Let's not forget in 2007 in the financial crash and before that, Britain had to bail out the banks of the Republic of Ireland. They also stood over them and helped them with, I suppose you could say, a guarantor for them. And this is something that Sinn Féin are now learning. They're coming to power. They may well be the next political power in the Republic of Ireland. And they're having to accept that a rubber stamp from the Crown gives you political credibility. But political credibility also brings political nonsense with it. If you just sit and have a look at that for a moment or two, Boris Johnson lost his political credibility, but he had that much of it. He had huge amounts of it, so it was easy to chip away at and take him down. Sinn Féin, have had so many very, very public nonsenses, shall we say, funerals for former leaders of the IRA, etc., in the middle of COVID, and not one resignation. Once you start to get that political credibility and start to move, it is actually very, very important to keep it there. So as much as they're getting that invite, they're going there, but they're also saying to the public, we accept that the Crown means something. But Alastair, just before I go, an old gaffer of mine from Sligo used to say to me, get in amongst the people. Don't ask questions on tape or on a notepad. Just get in amongst them and talk to them. I have been coming to Hillsborough every day, even on my day off, to just talk to the crowds, get a feeling of what's going on. Just look at this behind me. There is thousands of people streaming through Hillsborough. It's been going on for hours. Going in one gate, back out the other. Yesterday I did a piece about the flowers here, and I'll just move it out of the way ever so slightly and let you see that. That is what we are really looking at, and anybody that tells me that nationalism is up front and that the monarchy is very much on a down spiral is commenting on social media. They are not in amongst the people, they're not knowing their patch, and if anything, this is the proof of it.
Duchy, great stuff. Thank you very, very much indeed. Duchy Beattie there, live outside Hillsborough Castle. With me in the studio still Michael. Yeah, no, Michael's just done that to me, which means I do want to say something. And I was going to come to you because, I tell you what, I was sitting here after years of experience listening to Duchy Beattie, and just don't worry. We've been joined by a lady there as well in that rather elegant jumper. She's another guest, but I'm not going to spoil it because for me it's a great surprise. For you it will be a great surprise. So bear with us just for a couple of moments, Ella. That was an object lesson in Irish history and in how to do your job as a television journalist.
It's wonderful. One of the peculiarities of our famously unwritten constitution is since the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922, Irish people from the 26 counties, the Republic, have had free access to come into this country without passports, without visas, without work permits, and immediately they come in, As soon as they're eligible, they go on the voters' roll and they vote.
Yeah.
That is the strange relationship. And of course, 1 week every year, the Republic of Ireland annexes Cheltenham. It takes it over for the Cheltenham Gold Cup week. So that is the closeness that is in these, despite the history in the past, there is a fantastic closeness. Witness the fact also that the Earl Marshal, who we've been referring to, the Duke of Norfolk, traditionally always the Duke of Norfolk. The Duke of Norfolk is the leading lay Roman Catholic person in this country. So there we are. A Roman Catholic is running this great Church of England. This is why...
It's a tricky issue occasionally in Tudor times.
Of course, but that's the peculiarity. But as I say, it works because we make it up as we go along, and we're all tolerant, and we're all reasonable. It all works. And when you see the different faiths going through Westminster Hall, people crossing themselves, making their own obeisance there, what it reinforces, I mean, King Charles got a lot of flack when he said, I want to be the defender of faith rather than the faith. He got a lot of flack, but essentially in this diverse, mixed country that we are now, that's the obvious way to go. Anybody who believes in a superior being, he's going to be standing up for them.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed for those reflections. As we watch the comings and goings there yet again in Westminster Hall, the great and the good, men and women of all stations in life paying their respects. And I'm going to correct myself. I said something at the turn of the hour about the 14th day. It's the 4th day of the late Queen lying in state there in Westminster Hall. It is the penultimate day of national mourning with that moment of silence and indeed reflection later on tonight. And as there is a change of the guard going on, we'll keep an eye on those pictures and cut back to them should anything change. Now, the lovely, patient person sitting with us as well in the studio, who was smiling widely as well when Michael Cole was reflecting upon times changed and Catholic Dukes of Norfolk, is a very special person. New friend of mine, but I hope one who I won't upset or cause any embarrassment to, because she's got a very personal connection with all of what is going to unfold tomorrow. Ella Marks is a Queen's Honours Award recipient who will be at the funeral as an invited attendee. And I think, if I may use terribly modern language, that's pretty damn cool.
I'm amazed that I was asked and delighted and honoured.
2 steps back, what was it that you did that earned you that honour in the honours list?
The citation was for services to the people of Ealing. Those services have included a fair amount of, since I retired, a fair amount of voluntary work in one capacity or another. I was a volunteer at the local hospice at some point. I was a volunteer at a school with children with special needs. The main thing, I think, that has caught the attention of the press was that I read for the new talking newspapers for the blind and partially sighted. So that there was, several things I've been involved in.
It is a truly wonderful thing that you've done there, because I know there's another group out there, and we had them on the programme a wee while ago, who do talking books for children who are enduring autism. And it's world-changing. I mean, it's life-changing.
Well,
it's just amazing.
It provides the opportunity for people who haven't got access to papers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or online, or being able to see them online.
Let's keep some of the newspapers away from them, all that nonsense. But to have a good book read to you by someone as loving and thoughtful as you is just awesome. And well done. And secondly, you mentioned in passing there the hospice movement, which you've been a strong supporter of. As they often say in respectful circles, God is in his or her heaven, One of the great causes for the new Princess of Wales is the hospice movement.
I'm delighted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Vital, vital work.
Yes.
OK, right. Now let's cut back to it. So the phone rings, or a letter arrives, or a telegram. How is Ella told, keep Monday clear?
I was telephoned last Saturday week, not yesterday, the week before, by somebody from the Cabinet Office. Bit dubious, Cabinet Office, what of that? Never heard of it. I beg their pardon. You know, would I like to be present at the Abbey for the funeral? Well, there's no question. Would I like? I never contemplated such a thing, and was told that people who'd been honoured in the recent honours list were being offered. So that's what they told me. So that's just over a week ago. I, at some point, began to think it was a scam, because they didn't follow up with an email and post as they had said they would. So come Wednesday, I phoned them, and it wasn't a scam. And it was at that point they said, would I be prepared to talk to the media?
Well, warmest congratulations on being just very slightly cynical, because there are some ghastly people out there who do that sort of thing. Secondly, hurrah for not knowing what the Cabinet Office is. There are many who would argue that few need to know what the Cabinet Office is, but there we are.
I beg its pardon.
It is increasingly important, but I'm so glad it was confirmed. I'm going to contradict you, if I may, just very slightly about, you would have watched, I know, but you're not normally directly engaged in this sort of matter. Your dad was, and as a result of his interest, did he not take you?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Tell us that.
Oh, well, OK. My first association is that I was born and named after the little princess. My second name is Elizabeth.
Oh, lovely.
My first name is Ella. My second name is Elizabeth. My father was a true loyalist, and he then subsequently took me to outside Buckingham Palace when George VI was crowned, and I was on his shoulders. I don't remember that. That's just family history. So he was a loyalist. He had come here in 1914 on his own, no family, no friends, very, very little money, I assume. He was naturalised in 1926, and he remained a loyalist ever after, joining the National Fire Service during the war, because he was too old to sign up, be called to the army. He wanted to do something.
Yeah. Service was in the genes, wasn't it, Ella?
It's in the Jewish ethos.
Yeah.
You give service when you can.
Michael's bursting to ask you something.
Yeah,
I have no idea what it is, but...
I was going to say, the hospice movement was pioneered, invented in this country. It's something to be proud of. And the very first charity that the new Princess of Wales took on was East Anglian Children's Hospice in Ipswich and other places around East Anglia. So I live in East Anglia now, and we're very, very proud of that. And could I just say something very, very serious for a moment? Because we have a constitutional monarch, and because every piece of legislation has to be signed off by the monarch, if those infamous Nuremberg laws of 1936, which made Jewish people non-people and led inevitably to the gas chambers and the furnaces, if a constitutional monarch, even Kaiser Wilhelm II, had been there instead of abdicating to Holland after the First World War, a constitutional monarch in this country, presented with such vile legislation, would have refused to sign it, fed it to the corgis, and there may have been a constitutional crisis of Parliament against the Crown, but that is the backstop. That is our protection against extremism, dictatorship.
Absolutely.
Never forget it.
This is what I have felt. That it has provided, I feel the Queen has provided stability and continuity and has given me a feeling of safety.
And always on good terms with the Chief Rabbi.
Yes.
Haven't they? They always get on well.
More than a lot of Jews have been, but yes.
Yes, well, you have nice factions. But, of course, if you have two Jewish people together, you have at least three opinions.
Three arguments.
Well, we have four people in the studio, but the three of us, who are not you, Ella, are clearly of one view, and that is, A, we are thrilled to bits for you. we wish you well and warmest congratulations, not only on just one of those things that is as it were, a dream come true, because you clearly didn't dream of it nor expect it. But if it's appropriate to say enjoy it, that's probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
This is what people have been saying to me, and they say,
it's tricky to know what to wish.
You can't say enjoy.
Wish you well, and that it'll be a wonderful experience.
Witness, that's
to
it.
share. Witness is the right word.
Yes.
To bear witness.
And have you got all of this is almost state secret stuff, but have you got the details of where to be and what time to be in?
Yes, they came yesterday morning, finally.
And you've double-checked that as well?
Yes.
That sounds like brilliant staff work by Buckingham Palace, I must say.
Totally. And jolly nice to see Buckingham Palace and the Cabinet Office, whatever that is, working in close harmony. Ella, our time is up, alas, but let me say genuinely, personally, thanks for breaking into your busy day, your busy Sunday, to come and share time with us. Our collective warmest congratulations on being invited to those great events on Monday. But in a curious way, thank you so much for everything that you have done and that you continue to do that earned you that honour in the first place, the key to it all. It's been a real pleasure meeting you, Ella, and thank you.
Thank you for asking me.
Can I go? Wow. Ella Marks, what a brilliant way to end. It's 9 minutes to 3. We're nearly done with an expected television audience of more than half of the world's population tomorrow. Billions of viewers will say a final farewell to the late Queen Elizabeth II. Many more will also have travelled to London, and our reporter Sophie Reaper has been speaking to some of those from the northwest who'll be making the journey.
Tomorrow, the world will look on as our Queen of 70 years is finally laid to rest. A historical event that will be talked about for generations to come. People from all over the world will travel to London to play even a small part in the day.
It is a train journey, it is a long way. We do know we're going to hit massive crowds when we do get there, but that's just part of it. That's just something, this is bigger than us, so this is something that we do need to go through.
We know there's going to be a lot of people there. We know we might not get anywhere near or may not be able to see anything or any of the processions, but just by being there and being part of it just means a lot to us both.
After the Queen's 70 years of service, for Helen and Karen, travelling from the northwest seems a small sacrifice to make in order to be part of such an important day.
Being down in London means there will be a shared grief with lots of people who we don't know, and that's part of what we're going to do.
And I think that's what's so wonderful about our country as well. And you've seen on the news all week since the Queen's been lying in state about people coming together and strangers becoming friends. And I think just the country coming together.
Of course, not everyone can make the journey down to London, but that doesn't mean they won't be watching.
I was there for the Jubilee, Platinum Jubilee. The atmosphere was fantastic, and it would have just been nice to be able to say goodbye to the Queen as well.
It's going to be a very, very solemn but very great occasion. We've all been watching history unfold the last few days, and this is going to be another part of history. It's something generations will remember.
It will be wonderful and very fitting, and I will personally feel very proud that the eyes of the world are upon London.
After a procession to Westminster Abbey, the funeral itself is expected to have an attendance of around 2,000 guests. And, given the Queen's title as Duke of Lancaster, just one of those guests will be Lancashire's Lord Lieutenant.
I'm looking forward to what will be a momentous state occasion, sombre, reflective, but I'm sure there will be an element of hope for the future running through it as well. That's what the Queen has left us.
A difficult day for the world, but also a day for people from all walks of life to come together and reflect.
I think if we've seen anything over the last few days since the Queen's death, it's been a tremendous sense of unity. People have come together. Even if it's just to stand on the side of the road to watch the hearse and the coffin go by. People have come together. We've shared mourning. and shared our respect and affection for the Queen.
Tomorrow, the eyes of the world will be on London, and mouths will say a final goodbye. But our hearts will always remember Queen Elizabeth II. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Sophie Reaper reporting there. Lots of you have been writing in with your thoughts, and I'm really pleased that you have, because they are so good. Unedited, merely selected by my team. But let's start off with Nick. Regarding the Queen's involvement in her funeral plans, when told that her coffin would be conveyed, should it be necessary, in a C-17 freight aircraft, she referred to the use of C-17s in the repatriation of casualties from Afghanistan and Iraq, stating, and Nick quotes, "If it's good enough for my boys, it's good enough for me." Alex says, "This whole process has been really surreal. I'm not sure that there will be another week quite like it. Rest in peace." Andrew, "I'm a 63-year-old man, born and raised in East London, now living in Essex. I've never classed myself as a royalist, but the passing of Her Majesty's affected me greatly. I'm continually following the coverage of the lying in state and seeing mourners wiping their tears away. It's causing me to swallow hard and wipe away a tear or two as well. Her Majesty will be missed. Long live the King." John writes, "It was an honour to wait in the queue for the late Queen. It was the least I could do after her years of impeccable service to our nation." And finally, Mike says, "Surely the queue to see the late Queen in state is as impressive as all the pomp and ceremony events. An unrehearsed outpouring of thoroughly decent, diverse, respectful people, and I suspect the vast majority in this country and globally, all too often forgotten." Thank you all very much indeed. Captured the mood. Final thoughts ahead of tomorrow, Grant?
I think tomorrow there's going to be millions watching this, many people there. And I was just thinking that you can see there's lots of people using phones and photography. I think for a moment they need to stop and just take in what's happening, because tomorrow is a truly memorable day for all of us. And I think people need to, just for a little second, just put the devices away, because the Queen was never a fan of all this modern technology, and just, you know, take a second just to realise what's happening, because it's a huge event, and one that many of us might never see again. Well,
never a fan of it, but she did master the internet and the email eventually.
She did try, yes, she
bless
did.
Her heart, so great credit. You've been brilliant all these 3 hours and over the few days. Your final thought, Michael Cole?
These are days of history. These are momentous events. Nothing like this has ever been seen before, and this gathering of world leaders. We all have our moments, but for me, it was something that you captured in Westminster Hall. The Queen famously never went to school. When she joined the Brownies, the pack came to her. And I was just happened to be seeing, and the cameraman did brilliantly, 3 little girls in Brownie uniform came and gave their salute to the Queen they'll never meet. And that was the moment, as far as I was concerned. But you, not a year old, GB News, you are documenting this impeccably, and I congratulate you.
Grateful, Michael. And Grant, always good to see you. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
And these events, when they can reduce the likes of me, watching Lord Severn last night and Michael Cole just now, to tears, that's what it's about. You've been watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here today on GB News. I'll be back tomorrow with the state funeral. Until then, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be largely dry and cloudy, with just a few showers around the coast. Here are the details. There'll be some evening sunshine in parts of southwest England, particularly across Devon and Cornwall. Temperatures will quickly fall after dark, giving way to a chilly night. There could be 1 or 2 brief showers in the southeast this evening, which may pass over London. However, most places will stay dry with largely cloudy skies. Skies will stay cloudy across Wales this evening. South Wales should remain dry, but a few light showers will move into the north and west. Staying cloudy across the Midlands to end the day, perhaps with a few glimmers of late sunshine. However, the odd shower is possible where the cloud thickens. It'll be a cloudy end to the day across northern England, with showers mainly around coastal areas but drier inland. The showers will gradually fade later in the evening. Any showers across Scotland will slowly fade away tonight, but skies will stay on the cloudy side. Gaps in the cloud may develop across Aberdeenshire, allowing for a chilly night. Cloudy but largely dry in Northern Ireland this evening. A brisk northwesterly wind may push a few light showers into the north coast. Most parts of the country will stay dry and cloudy tonight. It'll turn rather chilly in northern Scotland and southwest England by dawn. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
On Monday, we as the United Kingdom gather to mourn, pay tribute and give thanks to Queen Elizabeth II. Here at GB News, we invite you to gather with Anne Diamond, historian David Starkey, and myself, Alastair Stewart, live from Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, all day Monday.